Every single person who lives in Springfield is yellow. Not a little yellow. Not a warm skin tone that photographs yellow under the wrong lighting. Pure, unmistakable cartoon yellow. Homer is yellow. Marge is yellow. Bart is yellow. The mayor is yellow. The doctor is yellow. The man in the background of a crowd scene who you have never been able to identify and probably never will is also yellow. And the show has been on the air for 36 years and has never once offered an explanation for why. That choice was deliberate, and the reason behind it is more interesting than most people know. When Matt Groening was developing the visual identity of the show in the late 1980s, he made a specific creative decision about color. He wanted a viewer who had looked away from the television and then looked back to know instantly, without processing dialogue, without recognizing a face, just from the color alone, that The Simpsons was on. Yellow does that. Yellow reads from across a room. Yellow cuts through the ambient visual noise of a home environment in a way that pale skin tones simply do not. The yellow skin was not an aesthetic statement. It was a practical solution to the problem of holding attention in a medium where attention is always drifting. But the animators took that practical starting point and did something much more careful with it. The yellow in Season 1 is different from the yellow in Season 8. The earliest episodes have a slightly richer, more saturated version of the color, something warmer and deeper, the yellow of a place that still believes in itself. By the middle seasons, the yellow settled into something a little flatter, a little more institutional. And in the later years, if you put an episode from 1991 next to an episode from 2015, the difference in palette is visible even on a casual viewing. The color of Springfield has been aging in ways that the characters are not allowed to age. The town itself carries the weight of time that no single resident is permitted to show. Pay attention to how the show uses color to map the town. The residential streets where working families live exist in earth tones and muted greens, colors that feel lived in and slightly tired. The nuclear plant has its own chromatic territory entirely. Institutional green and warning orange, two colors that in any real-world context signal caution and emergency, but that in Springfield have been normalized into background. Burns Manor is built from shadow and stone, deep purples and cool grays, a building that belongs to a different century and has never bothered to pretend otherwise. Springfield Elementary exists in that specific shade of yellow-green that every American who attended a public school in the 1970s or 1980s will recognize immediately. The color of low budgets and fluorescent tubes and linoleum floors that have been cleaned so many times they are no longer quite any color at all. The Quick E-Mart operates under a different light source than any other location in the show. The interior of the store is rendered in that flat, slightly blue-white convenience store fluorescence, the kind of light that makes everything inside it look like a photograph taken slightly wrong. When Homer or Bart steps through that door, the warmth of Springfield's ambient palette gives way to something cooler and more transactional. It is the light of a place that is open at 3 in the morning, the light of a place that does not require you to be comfortable, only to make a purchase and leave. The background artists made that choice deliberately. They understood that a building's light source is part of its character. The sky above Springfield changes with the emotional temperature of whatever is happening in it. There are Springfield skies that feel like the last day of summer, deep blue pulling toward purple at the edges, the kind of sky that lives in memory rather than in weather reports. There are Springfield sunsets painted in extravagant pinks and golds, almost aggressively beautiful, the kind of sky that makes you feel nostalgic for something you cannot quite name. And then there are Springfield skies in the episodes that are asking harder questions, skies that are low and gray and heavy, the light pressing down on the town like something that has been sitting there a long time and has no plans to move. The production peak of seasons 4 through 8 has a specific quality of painted light in its backgrounds that the later seasons, particularly after the transition to digital production in the early 2000s, could not quite replicate. The backgrounds in those years have a warmth and a physical density that comes from being made by artists who were spending serious time on images that would be on screen for seconds. A background painting from season 5 might represent hours of work visible for less than a minute. That density is felt even when it is not consciously noticed. Springfield in those years feels like a place that exists when the camera is not on it. Now look at the hands. Every human character in The Simpsons has 4 fingers. This is a production convention inherited from decades of animation tradition, a shortcut that makes hands faster to draw and easier to read at small scale. Disney used four-fingered characters in the 1920s, and the convention spread through the industry from there. The Simpsons did not invent it, but The Simpsons did something with it that most people have never registered. When God appears in the show, his hands have 5 fingers. Every Springfield resident has 4. God has 5. The show drew a quiet distinction between the divine and everyone living downwind of the nuclear plant. Whether this was a deliberate theological observation or a visual coincidence that someone noticed and chose not to correct is a question without a clear answer. What is certain is that it is there. The next time God appears in a Simpsons episode, look at his hands. The eyes of the main characters are worth studying carefully because they each carry different information. Homer's eyes have a slightly outward push to them, occupying fractionally more of his face than strict anatomy would allow. Lisa's eyes are large in a way that communicates a constant internal richness, an inner life perpetually in motion. Maggie's eyes are enormous relative to her face and almost completely still, and the stillness is its own form of expressiveness. Marge's eyes carry a permanent small anxiety in their default position, a faint readiness for concern that is baked into her resting expression even in episodes where she has nothing specific to worry about. The eyebrows operate as their own separate language across the entire series. Homer alone can produce somewhere between 5 and 7 clearly distinct emotional states through brow movement, without changing anything else in his face. The flat skepticism, the raised hope, the slow furrow of concern, the sudden drop of bewilderment that became one of the most imitated expressions in the history of the medium. Animation teams across dozens of production years maintained these eyebrow conventions with remarkable consistency, which is part of why the show feels like a coherent world rather than a collection of separately produced episodes. The faces remain legible across decades of changing hands. The architecture of Springfield refuses to be geographically coherent. Mountains are visible from downtown. There is a harbor. There is a gorge deep enough that falling into it is treated as a serious consequence, and Homer has done it multiple times. There are forests within walking distance of what presents as a mid-sized American city. The elementary school shifts between a modest 2-story building and something large enough to house a small institution depending on what the episode needs. The Simpson house expands and contracts in its interior dimensions based on narrative requirement. None of this is consistent. All of it is deliberate. The nuclear plant is the single most carefully positioned building in the entire show. It appears in the background of establishing shots at angles that should not be geometrically possible given where it is supposed to be located. Its cooling towers lean slightly toward each other, a detail subtle enough that most viewers register it only as a vague unease, rather than a specific observation. Well-maintained cooling towers are straight and vertical. The towers of the Springfield plant lean. The lean is small. The lean is always there. Green is the color of danger inside the plant. The reactor core glows green. The waste drums are green. The runoff that the show occasionally depicts trickling into waterways is green. Green, in the context of nuclear energy, is not a natural color. It is the color of things that should not glow, of contamination made visible, of biological wrongness that the eye registers before the mind can process why. Someone on the production team decided at the beginning that the plant's interior should live in that color, and that decision has been maintained across every episode, every season, every animation studio that has worked on the show over 36 years. The opening credit sequence has a detail that most viewers miss, even after years of watching. As the camera moves through Springfield in the title sequence, the nuclear plant appears in the background of multiple shots. It is there behind the school. It is there behind the commercial district. It is visible through the window of Marge's car as she drives home. The sequence is designed to feel celebratory, a warm, panoramic tour of a town we love. But the plant is in almost every shot. The home exists permanently in the shadow of the thing that may be slowly reshaping everyone who lives there. The couch gag has been running since season 1 and has produced hundreds of variations, ranging from 3-second physical jokes to elaborate short films that have nothing directly to do with the show. Most viewers treat it as a warm-up, the signal that the episode is starting. But the couch itself is a piece of visual information the show returns to with an obsessiveness that rewards attention. It is always the same couch. always in the same living room, always facing the same television set. The couch is the gravitational center of the Simpson universe. Every time the family lands on it, they are briefly together, briefly at rest, briefly occupying the same space before the episode sends them back into their separate orbits. The couch gags became progressively more ambitious as the show extended. The early ones were simple, physical comedy. The later ones broke the fourth wall, referenced other media, deconstructed the show's own visual history, gestured toward futures that the show's structure prevented it from actually depicting. The couch gag became the show's most experimental space, the place where the production team could do things that the narrative format of a 22-minute family comedy could not otherwise contain. All of this visual information, the color geography, the four fingers, the eyebrow language, the leaning towers, the green reactor glow, the couch, the sky that changes with the emotional weather of the episode, adds up to a world that has been built with considerably more intentionality than its cheerful cartoon surface would prepare you to find. Springfield looks simple. The character designs are clean, the palette is bright, but underneath the readability is a system of visual choices that has been refined across decades and that communicates things the dialogue never says directly. The show has been speaking in this visual language since the first frame. It will still be speaking it in the last. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a good moment. Homer Simpson is probably the most recognizable fictional character in the history of American television, and he is understood by most casual viewers as a lovable fool. A man defined by his appetites, someone who wants donuts and beer and sleep, who causes disasters through incompetence, who absorbs punishment with cartoon resilience and emerges unchanged. That Homer is real and that Homer is funny. But that Homer is the outermost layer of a considerably more complicated person. There is a Homer who exists in the spaces between jokes. He watches his children sleep with an expression that sits somewhere between contentment and disbelief, as if he cannot quite accept that these specific people are his to love. He says things to Marge in unguarded moments that are so precisely right for who she is that they reframe every argument surrounding them. He cries at things he cannot explain and does not try to explain, because the feeling arrives without vocabulary attached, and he has learned to let it pass through him without demanding it identify itself. The question that the show's best episodes raise without fully answering is who Homer was before Springfield and its particular atmosphere finished shaping him. The flashback episodes show a younger Homer whose edges are sharper, not dramatically different, not unrecognizable, but present in a way the adult Homer sometimes is not, more awake to what he wants and more willing to want it openly. He wanted Marge with an urgency that young desire always carries, urgently and without a clear path toward what he was reaching for, and in those flashback scenes the want is visible and specific and human, in a way his adult contentment sometimes obscures. The show established at various points that Homer's cognitive function has been significantly reduced from whatever baseline it started at. A crayon lodged in his brain since childhood is the most direct explanation offered. When it is removed in the season 12 episode and his intelligence returns, what Homer experiences is not relief. What he experiences is grief. He sees Springfield for what it is. He sees his job for what it is. He sees the gap between the life he has been living and the life that might have been available to him, and the gap is too large to live comfortably inside. So he chooses to put the crayon back. He chooses the fog deliberately because the clarity was worse. That choice is one of the most quietly devastating things the show ever did with his character, and it is easy to miss because it is surrounded by comedy and because Homer himself does not appear to fully understand what he is doing. He writes Lisa a letter before the procedure, at his peak of recovered intelligence, and the letter is tender and specific and completely unlike anything the post-crayon Homer could produce. Then he gives up the ability to write that letter again. He chose the version of himself that cannot reach his daughter the way she needs to be reached, because the version that could reach her found the world unbearable. Homer's relationship with his own body is one of the more interesting aspects of his characterization that the comedy tends to obscure. He has absorbed damage across the show's run that would be fatal several times over in any realistic context. Falls, impacts, electrocutions, explosions. He recovers from all of it. The show plays this as slapstick, and it functions as slapstick, But there are specific episodes where Homer endures something and the show is not quite playing it as funny, where the endurance reads as something learned rather than something innate. He has learned to take it, to let it happen and keep going. This is either superhuman resilience or it is the specific toughness of someone who has had a great deal of practice absorbing things he did not choose. His musical sensitivity appears in scattered episodes across the series and then disappears again, as if the show is not entirely sure what to do with it. He sang in a barbershop quartet with genuine ability. He has moments where a particular piece of music reaches him in a way that bypasses the fog entirely, where the feeling arrives whole without needing to pass through the compromised cognitive machinery. These moments are brief. They are never commented upon. Across the decades, they accumulate into a portrait of a man who feels more than the surface of his daily behavior would suggest, who has a deeper register that music sometimes finds, and that ordinary life mostly does not. His relationship with Marge is the load-bearing wall of the entire series. It is not a simple dynamic. It is the dynamic of two people who chose each other young and have grown in different directions without growing apart, who fight and disappoint each other and circle back because the alternative to this relationship is not something either of them is able to clearly imagine. When the show is at its best, the Homer and Marge scenes feel lived in rather than written. They feel like something that has been accumulating for a long time, and that carries that accumulation in every exchange. His relationship with his father Abe is the show's most consistently painful undercurrent. Abe is a man who failed at fatherhood in ways he has never fully acknowledged, who chose self-preservation over honesty at a specific moment that cost his son decades of unnecessary grief. Homer's feelings about his father are almost never articulated directly. The episodes that explore the relationship do it through behavior rather than conversation, through the specific discomfort that both men carry in each other's company, through the particular awkwardness of people who share history but not language. Homer visits the nursing home less than he should. When he is there, he listens to his father with more patience than he usually manages anywhere else. He is trying in those moments to do better than he usually does. He does not always succeed. What the show returns to, in the episodes that reach the most deeply into who Homer is the gap between the father he wants to be and the father he actually manages. He wants to be present. He wants to be the kind of father whose attention is a gift. He fails at this in specific, documented, unresolved ways and then tries again in the next episode, because the desire is real even when the execution falls short. The desire has never stopped being real. That is the thing the comedy makes easy to miss. Under the falling down and the donuts and the strangling and the disasters, there is a man who wants to do right by his family and who keeps getting up after failing to do so, and that persistence is not nothing. It is, in fact, the whole show. Homer is at his most himself in the quiet moments that the show does not always stop to examine. Alone in the driveway at the end of the day, not yet ready to go inside. At the kitchen table after everyone else has gone to bed. On the back step in the evening, watching the light change over the yard. In these gaps between one thing and the next, there is a Homer who is simply present, not running from anything, not reaching toward anything, just existing in his life with the full weight of it around him. That Homer is worth staying with. He has been carrying a great deal for a long time, and he carries it without expecting acknowledgement, and there is something in that worth sitting with tonight. Marge Simpson has the tallest hair in the history of American animation. It rises from her head in a single unbroken column of blue that defies gravity and convention, and 36 years of weather. And it never changes, which is itself a piece of information. The hair is not accidental. The hair is maintained. It requires a daily recommitment to a specific presentation of self. A deliberate choice made every morning to be this particular version of Marge Simpson, rather than any of the others she might have been. The show eventually revealed that Marge's natural hair color is gray, that the blue has been a choice she has been making since she was young, which means the tower is not who she is. It is who she decided to be, and she has been sustaining that decision for as long as the show has been running, which is longer than most of its viewers have been alive. There is something in that worth sitting with. The most recognizable thing about Marge is something she chooses every day. In the earliest seasons, before the writers had found the full range of what she could carry, Marge was primarily functional. She was the counterweight, the person who noticed when things were wrong and pulled the family back towards something resembling stability. She worried. She maintained. She provided the equilibrium that the household required. These are not small things to do, but they are things that do not require much interiority to perform, and the show did not always give her the interiority she deserved. What changed across the series was the gradual accumulation of episodes that asked a different question. Not what does Marge do for her family, but what did Marge Bouvier imagine her life becoming before it became this? Those episodes form a thread through the series that is easy to miss because they are scattered across many seasons, and the show does not treat them as a unified arc. But they add up. Marge wanted to paint, and when she discovered she was genuinely good at it, the show depicted the discovery not as simple happiness, but as a kind of destabilization. The painting belonged entirely to her. It did not make anything in the household run better. It simply existed as evidence of an inner life that her daily routines could not contain. Her anxiety is one of the most honestly drawn aspects of her characterization, and one of the least discussed when people talk about the show. The texture of Marge's worry is specific. It is not the vague unease of someone who suspects things might go wrong. It is the sustained vigilance of someone who has taken personal responsibility for preventing a very long list of possible disasters, and who maintains that vigilance even when the current situation does not require it. The worry has become a habit, a default orientation toward the world. The episode that names this most directly does so without resolving it, because the naming is the point. She has been managing this her whole life, and nobody in the household has ever quite seen it clearly. Julie Kavner's voice performance across the entire run of the show is one of the great sustained achievements in animation voice work, and its most interesting quality is what it communicates between the words. There is a restraint in the voice when Marge expresses concern, a compression that implies the concern being expressed is smaller than the concern being felt. There is a guardedness in her contentment that suggests contentment has not always been easy to find and should not be assumed to be permanent. Kavner plays the gap between what Marge says and what Marge means with a consistency that took years to establish and that now feels so natural it goes unnoticed. Patty and Selma, Marge's sisters, carry within their disapproval of Homer the implicit suggestion that they expected more for her. Whether they are right about this is a question the show poses without ever fully answering, which is the correct choice. The Bouvier sisters love each other with the specific mixture of genuine affection and bone-deep irritation that characterizes sibling relationships that were formed in childhood and have never been renegotiated for adult life. They have known each other too long to be diplomatic and too long to be indifferent. The space between those two things is where they live. The Marge who appears in flashback episodes is recognizable but surprising. Young Marge was earnest and slightly anxious before she had a household to justify the anxiety. She cared about doing things correctly in a way that the people around her sometimes read as rigidity. She was also, in specific moments the flashbacks reveal, genuinely funny, capable of dry observation and well-timed response. The adult Marge has filed the humor away somewhere, decided that her role in the household is not to be funny. The humor is still in there. The show finds it occasionally and then lets it go again. Her relationship with Lisa is one of the show's most nuanced, ongoing dynamics. They love each other with full sincerity, and they also, in specific episodes, find each other genuinely difficult. Marge's practical orientation toward the world can feel like a ceiling to Lisa, who wants to engage with ideas and ethics and the meaning of things at a level that Marge does not always have the energy or the framework for. Lisa's intensity can feel like an implicit critique to Marge, who is aware that her daughter inhabits the world more fully in some directions than Marge herself does. But in the episodes where they reach each other, where Marge simply sees Lisa rather than managing her, the show achieves something that the comedy surrounding it cannot diminish. What Marge wants from her marriage is genuinely more complex than the show usually has time to explore. She wants to be known. She wants to be with someone who sees her clearly, the full range of her, not the simplified domestic version that daily life makes easiest to inhabit. Homer at his best sees her with a clarity and a precision that is remarkable given everything else going on in his head. At his worst, she becomes part of the furniture of his life, necessary and present and not quite noticed. Both of these Homers are real. She chose both of them when she chose him, and the choice holds. The blue tower stays up. Every morning it is rebuilt, and every night it is still there, and the next morning it is there again, which is its own form of statement about persistence. Marge has been maintaining this particular version of herself since before the show began, through everything the show has put her through without being asked to account for the effort. The accounting has never come. The tower remains. The skateboard, the spiky hair, the orange shirt, the grin of someone who has never encountered a rule that felt personally binding. Bart Simpson became a cultural phenomenon before the show had fully figured out who he was, and the cultural image that settled around him, the pure attitude without interior, is considerably simpler than the character that actually lives in the episodes. The show established early and maintained consistently that Bart's academic failures are not the result of intellectual limitation. He is not slow. He is a child whose intelligence is pointed at things that Springfield Elementary cannot measure or accommodate. The pranks require timing and social awareness and the ability to predict how specific people will respond to specific stimuli. The strategies he develops to avoid authority demonstrate adaptive reasoning that would function extremely well in contexts more suited to his particular gifts. The contexts available to him in Springfield are not those contexts, which is the problem. He is a child running the wrong software on the wrong operating system. His relationship with Homer is one of the show's most honestly uncomfortable ongoing dynamics. Homer loves Bart. That is established and real. Homer also expects Bart to be something Bart is not, and that expectation exerts pressure on the relationship that neither of them has the tools to address directly. When Homer is disappointed in Bart's school performance, the disappointment is not simply parental concern about his son's future. It carries something more personal, some version of Homer looking at Bart and seeing a reflection he cannot fully separate from himself. Bart knows he is disappointing. He has decided that if the verdict is already in, the correct response is to make the verdict seem like a choice. The specific humor Bart deploys is worth paying attention to because it is not random. The best Bart jokes have a target and a logic. They are directed at hypocrisy, at authority that has lost contact with its own purpose, at pomposity performing itself for an audience that has stopped believing in it. Principal Skinner is an excellent target because Skinner is a man constantly performing authority while being privately uncertain whether he actually possesses it. The prank is not cruelty. The prank is criticism in the only register available to a 10-year-old. His friendship with Milhouse has a specific emotional asymmetry that the show handles with more care than the comedy of it would require. Milhouse loves Bart more than Bart loves Milhouse, and this imbalance is real and present in how their interactions are written. Bart takes from the friendship more than he returns, leads Milhouse into situations that Milhouse would never enter independently, uses the loyalty in ways that are not always fair. But there are episodes where the care runs in both directions, where Bart's investment in Milhouse's well-being is visible and genuine and takes him by surprise. These are the episodes that show you who Bart actually is, when the performance of not caring is briefly unnecessary. The recurring structure of the best Bart episodes is a movement from performed confidence toward revealed vulnerability. He begins from a position of apparent indifference, the kid who does not care about the things you are supposed to care about, and the episode finds the specific thing underneath the performance that does matter to him. When that thing is reached, when the armor briefly comes off, what is revealed is not weakness but need. The need to matter to someone he respects. The need for someone to look at who he actually is and find it worthwhile. The need that the armor was built to protect. His relationship with Lisa is the sibling dynamic at the heart of the show. They fight with the specific intimacy of people who know exactly how to make each other hurt, who have spent years in close proximity learning precisely which approaches produce which results. And they love each other with a consistency that the fighting never actually threatens. The episodes where they are genuinely kind to each other, where the competition dissolves into something warmer, are among the most quietly affecting in the series. They are not supposed to get along. The getting along, when it happens, means something. There is a gentleness in Bart that the show surfaces deliberately and not often. He is good with Santa's little helper in ways that reveal an emotional directness his social performances rarely allow. The dog trusts him. When Bart is low and the performance is down, the dog is usually nearby, and Bart allows a tenderness in those moments that he almost never shows where anyone might see it. The boy who does not care about anything cares about the dog. He cares about more than he is willing to perform caring about. The performance is the protection. What it is protecting is worth noticing. Lisa Simpson plays the saxophone. This matters more than it might initially appear. The saxophone is not a beginner's instrument. It is not what parents suggest when they want their child to have an afternoon activity. It carries specific cultural associations in American music, tied to jazz and to the kind of emotional expressiveness that does not fit neatly into available social categories. The saxophone is the instrument of people who feel things that the available vocabulary cannot hold. Lisa plays it with an intensity the show consistently depicts as genuine, as something she does not perform but inhabits, and this choice of instrument is one of the most precisely correct things the show ever did for her character. She is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old since 1989. In that time, she has accumulated the interior life of someone who has been paying very close attention to the world for a very long time, and who has not always liked what close attention finds. Lisa is the show's conscience, which gets discussed. She is also the show's most honest portrait of what it costs to be genuinely intelligent in an environment that does not know what to do with intelligence, which gets discussed much less. Her IQ has been established at various points as substantially above everyone around her. She reads beyond her grade, understands concepts in multiple disciplines that most adults in Springfield could not engage with, and plays music with an emotional sophistication that should not be possible in someone who has not yet mastered the pedestrian motor skills of her age group. None of this is presented as an uncomplicated gift. The episodes that examine what the intelligence actually costs her are among the most honest things the show produced. She is isolated by it. The social currency of childhood, the shared references and collective enthusiasms, and the ability to simply exist in the same emotional register as your peers, is not reliably available to her because she is operating at a different altitude. She can see further than the other children, which means she is always looking towards something they cannot yet see, which means she is always slightly elsewhere even when she is standing right there. She wants friends. This is depicted clearly and without the show ever allowing her to pretend otherwise. She is not someone who has decided that intellectual achievement is an adequate substitute for human connection. She wants both. She reaches for both. She gets neither as consistently or as fully as she needs, and the friends who do arrive tend not to stay, which is one of the show's quieter cruelties. Lisa is the character who most clearly understands what she has when she has it, and she is the character who most frequently watches it end. Her relationship with Homer is one of the show's most carefully sustained emotional achievements. They have almost nothing in common in terms of how they engage with the world. Homer's cognitive fog and his general orientation away from reflection and meaning put him about as far from Lisa's natural register as it is possible to be within a family. And yet the episodes that place them in genuine connection are consistently among the most emotionally precise in the series. They find each other through love that operates below the level of comprehension. Homer feels what Lisa is feeling even when he cannot understand it. Lisa knows her father loves her even when he cannot say it in the language she speaks. The love exists in the gap between them rather than across any bridge of shared understanding. The vegetarianism episode is one of the show's most significant acts of character integrity. Lisa makes an ethical decision based on genuine reasoning, and the show does not frame that decision as the problem to be solved. It takes her reasoning seriously, depicts the difficulty of maintaining an ethical position in an environment that does not support it, and, at the end, does not ask her to compromise. Paul McCartney, who appeared in the episode, made his participation contingent on Lisa's vegetarianism, being maintained permanently by the series. The production team agreed. Lisa has been a vegetarian in every subsequent episode without regression. This is one of the most unusual contractual commitments to character integrity in the history of the medium. Her silence with the saxophone is the thing that deserves the most attention. She plays when the words are not enough. She plays when the world has closed off some particular avenue and the feeling needs a way out that does not require the other party to understand it. The instrument has been with her longer than any friendship the show has given her. It has never left. It takes whatever she brings to it and returns it as sound, which is its own kind of being heard. In the evenings in Springfield, when the houses are going quiet and the light is doing that particular late thing it does over the town, she plays, and it goes where it goes, and that is enough. Springfield has a population of approximately 30,000 people, according to the most frequently cited in-show estimate. The viewer comes to know perhaps 2 or 3 dozen of them with any depth. But the visual world of the show extends far beyond those named characters into a background population that has been carefully designed and consistently maintained across decades of production, a crowd of recurring unnamed figures who appear and reappear across hundreds of episodes, creating the sense of a town that is actually inhabited rather than merely a backdrop. Ned Flanders has received more from the show's underlying machinery than almost any other supporting character, and less recognition for what has been done to him. He is organized around a theological proposition that genuine goodness is possible, that it can be sustained, that it will eventually be recognized and rewarded by the universe. The show has been systematically testing this proposition for 36 years. His wife was killed by a t-shirt cannon at a racing event. His house was destroyed by a hurricane and then rebuilt so incompetently by the community that it collapsed immediately. His faith has been answered with silence by a God who speaks readily to Homer Simpson, who is not notably devout and who does not particularly seem to want the conversations. The episode that reveals the psychological origin of Ned's niceness is one of the most important pieces of supporting character work in the series. The childhood behavioral conditioning, the programmed suppression of a rage that was apparently considerable in its natural state, retroactively changes everything about how his characterization reads. He is not saintly. He is controlled. The self he presents to the world was engineered by a therapist at the request of parents who did not believe in discipline and were confronting the consequences of that belief. His patience with Homer is not spiritual grace. It is the conditioned response of someone whose capacity for expressing anger was systematically disabled before he was old enough to choose. When that conditioning fails in the hurricane episode and he snaps, what emerges is not villainy. It is despair of a very specific and very deep kind. Groundskeeper Willie has ended up in Springfield under circumstances the show alludes to but never fully explains, tending the grounds of an underfunded elementary school and living in a shed on the property. His physical capability is considerable. His emotional depth, revealed across enough episodes, is also considerable. He is a man who operates well outside the institutional hierarchy of the school, who respects the physical space he maintains without respecting the authority that governs it, and who has a specific regard for Bart that reflects a recognition of a fellow outsider. Willie does not fit Springfield, and has never tried to. He simply persists in it, which is its own form of resilience. Sideshow Bob receives the most formally structured recurring attention of any supporting character. His episodes operate in a distinct generic register from the rest of the show, functioning as comedic thriller, as revenge narrative, as occasionally operatic. He is positioned as Bart's would-be murderer but developed with enough cultural sophistication and genuine theatrical personality that the audience generates sympathy even while he is actively planning harm. He is overeducated, overcomplicated, and constitutionally incapable of choosing the simpler path when a more baroque option is available. His relationship with Bart contains within it something that might be respect, the grudging regard of someone who recognizes an opponent worth having. The show has been careful never to resolve this completely. Mo Sislak runs the worst bar in Springfield and the emotional center of Homer's social life outside the family. His loneliness is specific and sustained, and has been running as an undercurrent through the series since the early seasons. He attempts relationships that do not hold. He attempts connections with the community that do not stick. He inhabits the tavern the way a man inhabits a place that became his life by default rather than choice. And there is something in his relationship to that particular space, to the light of the bar in the afternoon with nobody yet in it, to the routine presences of the men who come for reasons that are not entirely about the beer, that is both sad and sustaining. Mo is not in a good situation. He keeps showing up for it anyway. Hans Moleman has died more times than the show has been willing to count and has returned each time without explanation. He has been hit by cars, crushed by objects, buried, burned, eaten, and fallen. He reappears in the next relevant episode intact and available for the next incident. The show plays this as a running visual gag, and it functions as one, but across the accumulated weight of his many returns, something builds. He keeps coming back. Springfield keeps trying to remove him. He persists. If there is a figure in the show who most clearly embodies the town's impossible quality of continuation, its refusal to let permanent consequences land, it is this small, ancient, nearly blind man who was once reported to be 31 years old and has never looked it. Charles Montgomery Burns was born somewhere in the late 19th century and has been alive ever since. His exact age shifts across episodes depending on what the continuity requires, but the accumulated evidence places his birth before the 20th century existed. He is old enough to have personal memories of events that most of the show's audience has only encountered in history books. He attended Yale, he served in the Second World War, he knew Howard Hughes. He has stories about the Gilded Age that he tells not as history but as experience. Harry Shearer's vocal performance is the engine of the character, and it is one of the great sustained achievements of voice acting across the show's entire run. The voice belongs to another time, patrician and slightly thin, carrying within it the specific inflections of a class consciousness that was formed before the vocabulary for class consciousness existed as it currently does. Burns speaks with the assurance of someone who has never encountered a situation he could not buy his way out of or intimidate his way past, and the voice holds that assurance in its very timbre. The pauses, the careful enunciations, the occasional descent into something that might be warmth if it were not almost immediately complicated by self-interest. The power plant is the physical expression of everything Burns believes about the relationship between power and people. It is functional in the minimal sense that it produces electricity. It is not functional in the sense of being adequately maintained or safely operated. The 342 safety violations that a surprise inspection uncovered were not accidents or oversights. They were the accumulated result of a management philosophy that evaluated each safety expenditure against the revenue it would protect and found most of them insufficiently justified. Burns did not refuse to fix the plant because he could not afford to. He refused because spending money on safety meant acknowledging the problems, and acknowledging the problems meant someone might start asking questions about what those problems had already done to the people living around them. His relationship with money is the organizing principle of his character, and it operates at a level deeper than greed in the conventional sense. Burns was formed in a period when the accumulation of wealth carried moral weight in American culture, when having money was evidence of something about your character rather than simply a description of your circumstances. He carries this formation intact into the present. Money is not a resource for him. It is the proof of himself. Every dollar retained is a piece of evidence. Every dollar spent is a small erosion of that evidence. This is why the episodes where he is temporarily ruined are among the most revealing of his character. Without the money, he does not know what he is. Smithers manages Burns's life with a competence and a devotion that the salary, whatever it is, could not adequately compensate. He knows Burns's schedule, his medical requirements, his specific fears and preferences and habits of mind, the particular combinations of flattery and deference that keep the old man functional. He maintains all of this with the care of someone who understands that his absence would be catastrophic in ways that the employer has never fully acknowledged. Burns needs Smithers in order to continue existing. This dependency is real and structural. Burns does not recognize it as dependency, which is the management strategy of someone who has always held all of the power and has therefore never needed to notice which direction the need actually runs. Smithers's feelings about Burns have been legible since the earliest seasons, and the show has treated them with varying degrees of directness across its run. What has been consistent is that the feelings are genuine. His devotion is not professional performance. It is love of a specific and unrequited kind, organized around a person who is both genuinely important to him and constitutionally unable to love him back. The specific sadness of this arrangement, the life built around a relationship that will never be what it needs to be, is handled by the show in its better moments not as a joke but as a condition, a way of being that is chosen every day and that costs something every day and that he continues anyway. Burns's relationship with Homer is the show's most quietly interesting power dynamic. Homer is the safety inspector, the employee whose incompetence most directly enables the plant's continued unsafe operation, and Burns cannot reliably remember his name. This failure of recognition has been played as comedy across hundreds of episodes. But the comedy contains something worth looking at. A man who cannot remember the name of the person most crucial to his operation either has so many employees that the individual has become invisible, or he maintains the forgetting as a form of dominance, the power move of someone who communicates through willful blindness that you do not matter enough to be named. Both explanations fit Burns. The ambiguity is probably deliberate. He has come closer to dying than almost any other recurring character and has survived each approach through the same mechanism: money spent on infrastructure, medical facilities, private physicians, weekly treatments that his body requires to continue its particular form of functioning. The treatments that the Springfield Files episode depicts, which cause his body to emit a visible green glow and which must be administered on a precise weekly schedule or he dies, are the show's most explicit statement about the nature of his survival. He is not alive naturally. He is alive because he built a system designed to keep him alive and has maintained the system for over a century with the same strategic ruthlessness he brings to everything else. The cooling towers appear in the opening credits. They appear in the background of establishing shots throughout the town. They are visible from the school, from the residential streets, from the highway approaches to Springfield. In terms of screen time across the entire run of the show, the nuclear plant may be the single most depicted structure in the history of American animation, and it is a building that, by the operational standards of any real nuclear regulatory framework, should have been shut down decades ago. The 342 safety violations enumerated in the episode where Burns faces an inspection are not meant to be read as a list of minor paperwork problems. Radioactive waste dumped into bodies of water, radioactive waste on a playground, plutonium being used as a paperweight, cracked cooling infrastructure patched with chewing gum, luminous rats in the facility's lower levels, human skeletal remains in the basement with no explanation for how they got there or who they were. Each of these is a piece of information the show introduced as a joke and then left in place as a fact about the world, contributing to a cumulative picture of a facility that has been operating outside any reasonable definition of safe for the entirety of its depicted history. Homer's role in this system is not incidental. In any realistic regulatory framework, the safety inspector of a nuclear facility is the person most responsible for ensuring that operations comply with the standards designed to protect the surrounding population. A competent safety inspector would have shut Springfield's plant down within weeks of beginning the job. Homer is not a competent safety inspector. He sleeps at his station. He has caused accidental reactor incidents. He has taken nuclear material home in his pockets. He has resolved safety situations through methods that function in cartoon logic and would be catastrophic in engineering reality. His incompetence is not random. It is comprehensive and consistent, and it enables everything the plant does that should not be happening. The show eventually explained Homer's indestructible job security through the private arrangement between Burns and Abe Simpson, a deal brokered in silence in exchange for Abe's silence about something Burns had done. Homer's employment was never truly earned. It was contractually guaranteed before Homer was old enough to apply for it, as compensation for a crime that Homer knows nothing about, guaranteeing that no matter how many times he should have been fired, he would not be. His presence in Sector 7G is a consequence of his grandfather's deal with the man who signed his checks. The incompetence and the continued employment are both features of the same system, and neither of them happened accidentally. The plant's workers, visible in background shots across the series, move through the facility with the ease of people who have been doing this for long enough that the abnormal has become normal. The readings they do not look at twice, the sounds they have learned not to hear, the specific psychological adaptation of people who have made peace with an environment they cannot change and must continue to inhabit. This is not depicted as villainy. It is depicted as what happens when people spend enough time inside a broken system. The system begins to feel like the only possible version of how things work. The three-eyed fish, Blinky, is the plant's most famous output and the piece of evidence that the show introduced most directly and then allowed the town to absorb without consequence. A fish with 3 eyes was caught in a river near the nuclear plant. It became national news within the show's universe. A candidate for governor used it as evidence of environmental contamination. Burns ate the fish on live television to demonstrate harmlessness. The town watched, registered the image, and moved on. The fish are still in the river. The water is still the water. Nobody tested anything afterward, because testing would produce information, and information would create obligations, and obligations would cost someone something. Springfield's economic dependency on the plant is the mechanism that maintains this arrangement. The plant is one of the town's largest employers. Its tax contributions are significant to the municipal budget. Burns's wealth, which he deploys across Springfield's civic and political life, flows from the plant's operation. Remove the plant and the economic structure of the town destabilizes in ways that cannot be easily corrected. This dependency is not accidental. Burns spent a century building it. He built a town that cannot afford to examine what he is doing to it, and that inability to examine is the most durable safety system the plant has ever had. Animation is a medium of deliberate choices. Nothing appears on screen in an animated production by accident. Every object placed in a background, every piece of text on a passing sign, every book title on a shelf visible for 2 seconds, every graffiti mark on an underpass wall represents a decision made by a specific person on a specific day. The Simpsons, produced across 36 years by rotating teams of writers and artists, has been making these choices at extraordinary volume. A significant number of them were made purely for the pleasure of the people making them, placed where they knew most viewers would never look. The books in the Simpson house have titles, not placeholder titles designed to suggest books without being specific. Actual titles that can be paused and read. They reflect the character of the space they inhabit, comment on the episode's themes, make references that reward the viewer who takes the time to look. A single frame of The Simpsons' living room contains more reading lists than most people encounter in a month of browsing. The reading histories visible in background shelves across the series sketch an alternative portrait of this household, one in which the presence of books tells you things about who lives there that the dialogue never directly states. The newspapers and television news chyrons in the background of Springfield scenes carry their own parallel universe of civic information. Headlines and background shots reference local disasters that were never made into storylines, political developments the main cast never engages with, sports results and business news and social columns that sketch a version of Springfield's daily life that the episodes never fully depict. This is the ambient noise of a real community, the constant low-level production of information that real towns generate and that most residents stop consciously registering. The background artists of The Simpsons built Springfield's ambient information environment with the same care that was brought to everything else. The product names and brand logos visible throughout the show are altered versions of real products, close enough to be recognizable and different enough to maintain their position as commentary rather than endorsement. Duff Beer is the most developed of these. A fictional brand given a full visual identity, a distinctive can design, an advertising culture within the show, and enough accumulated characterization to feel like a real product rather than a prop. The entire landscape of Springfield's commercial environment is populated with these near brands, each of them a small piece of satire embedded in the visual texture of the world. The chalkboard gag that precedes the opening credits in most episodes is probably the most systematically underappreciated recurring element in the series. A sentence, always different, that Bart writes as punishment, that varies across every episode and never appears again. The sentences are mostly quick comic observations, but across the hundreds that have been produced, patterns emerge. There are seasons where the chalkboard gags become more pointed about real-world events. There are individual gags that are considerably darker than their format would imply. The chalkboard is the show's smallest canvas, and it has been used with remarkable consistency of creative ambition. The Easter eggs embedded in the background of specific episodes range from production in-jokes visible only to someone with detailed knowledge of how animation is made, to visual references to other episodes or other cultural objects that reward the viewer with specific knowledge, to genuine surprises that make no sense at first and make complete sense on reflection. The density of this practice increased as the show's culture of rewarding close attention became established. The production teams understood that they were making something people would watch many times, and they filled the backgrounds accordingly, putting things in corners where they knew they would not be found for years. The specific handwriting used for background text across the show is one of the traces that most clearly shows the human beings behind the production. The people who produce background art develop consistent handwriting styles for the text that appears in the environments they paint, and these styles are consistent within particular periods of the show. A background from Season 5 has handwriting the communities identifiably different from a background from Season 15 if you know what to look for. You are seeing the specific hand of a specific person who was at work on a specific day trying to make a fictional world feel inhabited. They succeeded. That they also left traces of themselves in the work is something the traces invite you to appreciate. Alf Clausen composed the music for The Simpsons from its second episode in 1989 until 2017, which is a continuous creative relationship with a single television series that spanned nearly 3 decades. In that time, he produced hundreds of original musical compositions, everything from brief comedic stings to extended dramatic underscore to full musical sequences that function as genuine pieces of music rather than simply as joke delivery mechanisms. The sonic world of Springfield is one of the most carefully constructed in American television and one of the least discussed. The main theme by Danny Elfman is the most immediately recognizable piece of music associated with the show, but it is in some ways the least interesting choice the show makes musically because it is the most visible. The interesting music in The Simpsons happens in the underscoring, in the cues that play behind scenes of varying emotional temperature, calibrated to support and shade rather than to direct. There is a musical vocabulary for Homer's domestic contentment, warm and slightly sleepy, the sonic equivalent of late afternoon light in a kitchen. There is a vocabulary for Bart's energy, playful and quick without being anxious. There is a vocabulary for Lisa that carries a melancholy undertone, even in her most contented moments, reflecting the show's understanding that her particular relationship to the world makes ease complicated. The musical parodies are the show's most sophisticated demonstration of genuine musical knowledge. When The Simpsons parodies a musical form, it does not simply gesture in that form's general direction and produce generic content. It inhabits the style being referenced with enough accuracy that someone with musical knowledge will recognize not just the genre, but the specific tradition, the specific period, the specific set of conventions being drawn from. The Gilbert and Sullivan parody sounds like Gilbert and Sullivan. The gospel sequence sounds like gospel. The opera parody knows what opera it is parodying. This level of stylistic accuracy is not required for the jokes to work. It is there because the people making the show knew the material well enough to do it correctly and cared enough to try. The original songs written for the show occupy a category of their own. They are not parodies. They are original musical works in specific styles, and the best of them function as music that would work independent of their comedic context. The Planet of the Apes musical sequence lasts about 2 minutes of screen time and contains enough musical invention to sustain a concept that could plausibly support a full theatrical production. The central song does everything a good musical theater number should do. It advances character, it advances situation, it communicates the emotional state of the person performing it, and it does all of this while also being funny. The combination of genuine craft and comedy is one of the show's defining achievements, and the place where its musical ambitions are most clearly visible. The voice performances that produced Springfield's sonic world are one of the great sustained achievements of American voice acting. Dan Castellaneta's Homer, Julie Kavner's Marge, Nancy Cartwright's Bart, Yeardley Smith's Lisa, and the range of characters produced by Harry Shearer and Hank Azaria represent performances maintained across hundreds of recording sessions over decades. The characters sound like themselves in 1993, and they sound like themselves in 2023, and these are the same performances, but they are not identical performances. Time has passed in the voices even as the characters are not permitted to age. There is more history in the later performances because the actors have more history with the characters, and the performances carry that history even when the episodes themselves do not reference it. The ambient sound design of Springfield's various environments is a layer of the show's world building that most viewers register only subliminally. Moe's Tavern sounds different from the elementary school, sounds different from the nuclear plant, sounds different from the Simpson living room. These sonic environments were established early and have been maintained with remarkable consistency, building an acoustic map of the town that the longtime viewer carries without being able to describe it explicitly. You would know if something sounded wrong in a familiar location before you could say what the wrongness was. The sound of Springfield is as recognizable as its color. The standard way of discussing The Simpsons continuity treats it as either irrelevant, because the show is primarily episodic comedy rather than serial drama, or broken, because the floating timeline and the reset button between episodes mean that any given episode's events exist in an uncertain relationship to all the others. This framework is incomplete. It misses the category of continuity that the show has actually maintained across its entire run, which is the continuity of character rather than the continuity of event. Characters do not reliably remember plot. They remain themselves. The consistency of who these people are across 36 years and rotating creative teams is one of the show's most underappreciated achievements. Homer moves the same way in a 2023 episode as he did in a 1992 episode, the slightly forward lean, the weight distributed toward the front of his feet, always slightly more committed to his momentum than his coordination fully supports. Marge moves with a purposeful stride that communicates her sense of mission in any given moment. Bart's walk has a specific quality of casual defiance that has been maintained since the earliest episodes. Lisa walks with the slight impatience of someone who is always trying to reach the next thing before the current thing is finished. These movement signatures were established and maintained through style guides and production documentation across every animation team that has ever worked on the show, and their consistency creates the impression of characters who exist in their bodies across time, rather than being redrawn fresh for each episode. The Simpson house has a spatial memory that longtime viewers carry without being able to fully describe it. The relative positions of rooms, the furniture in each room, the specific objects on the shelves, the photographs on the walls, none of this is always perfectly consistent, but it is consistent enough that the house feels like a real space with a real history rather than a set assembled from episode to episode. You would feel it if something were wrong before you could name what the wrongness was. The house is a place you know. The emotional continuity between episodes is the most important and most invisible form of continuity in the show. Characters do not carry the plot of previous episodes in explicit memory. They carry the feeling. The residue of what has happened to them inflects how they engage with each other in ways that are felt rather than stated. Homer and Marge arguing in a late-season episode have the quality of two people returning to familiar territory, not because the episode scripts their argument as a callback, but because the writers understand who these people are after this many years together, and right from that understanding, the argument has happened before. Both parties know it has happened before. The knowing is in the dialogue without being in the dialogue. The continuity of Burns's contempt for the people of Springfield runs through every season of the show and has never required explicit maintenance. It is simply there, in every interaction, in the specific inflection of every glance he directs at someone he has decided does not matter. The contempt is a fixed element of his characterization, and it has been consistent across every writer who has written him, because it is fundamental enough to his identity that departing from it would require an explanation the show has never offered. This is character continuity at the level of essence rather than at the level of plot, and it is what makes the show feel coherent across its long and complicated history. The long threads that connect disparate episodes across years of production are some of the most pleasurable things the show does for its most attentive viewers. A detail in a 2009 episode that echoes a detail from a 1994 episode. A piece of Simpsons house furniture that reappears after a long absence in a different context. An aspect of a character's behavior in a later episode that is explained by something established much earlier. These connections are not always planned. Sometimes they are the work of writers who maintained awareness of the show's archive. Sometimes they are coincidences that the audience reads as intentional because the audience has been paying close enough attention to find the pattern. The show has been running long enough that both kinds of connection exist, and the audience cannot always tell which is which turns out to be one of the pleasures of a work that has accumulated this much history. The Simpsons is set in America. This seems obvious and is worth stating with some care. It is not set in a version of America that has been sufficiently distorted by satire to be safely fictional. It is set in America the way that effective satire is always set in its subject, with enough realism to be recognizable and enough distortion to force recognition to become something more uncomfortable and more clear. Springfield is an American town. Its problems are American problems. Its pleasures are American pleasures. Its specific forms of dysfunction are American forms of dysfunction, rendered in cartoon yellow and nuclear green, but not fundamentally changed by the rendering. The economic baseline of the show is one of its most consistently maintained and least discussed qualities. The Simpsons are not poor and they are not comfortable in the way that middle class is sometimes used to imply comfort. They are the American family that has enough if nothing goes wrong, and in a show where something is always going wrong, the precariousness is always nearby. Homer's job security, as eventually revealed, was never truly earned. It was negotiated before he was old enough to apply for it. The stability of his life rests on a deal he knows nothing about, brokered by his father with his future employer in exchange for silence. This is the economic reality of many American working lives, rendered visible in a way that realistic drama rarely allows. The stability is contingent on arrangements the beneficiary cannot see. Every institution depicted in Springfield is failing at some level. The school is underfunded and its authority figures are variously exhausted, distracted, or imprisoned in their own psychological dramas. The police department operates on a logic of personal advantage and theatrical performance rather than actual civic service. Springfield's government, such as it is, exists primarily to produce graft and convenient incompetence. Even the church, which is Ned's domain, is depicted as an institution with earnest intentions and limited ability to address the actual spiritual needs of anyone who attends it. The show pairs this consistent institutional failure with a consistent depiction of individual capacity. The institutions fail. The people persist. The persistence is not triumphant. It is simply what people do when the institutions that are supposed to help them have stopped working. The show's political satire has changed register across its long run in ways that reflect the changes in American political culture rather than changes in the show's underlying values. The earliest seasons operated in a mode that assumed a shared center, a common understanding of what civic life should look like, against which the show's depictions of deviation could be measured. As that center became harder to locate in the actual country, the show's satire adapted, becoming more careful in some directions and more pointed in others, trying to maintain the position of a comedy that sees clearly rather than a comedy that sees one way. This is a difficult balance, and the show has not always maintained it perfectly, but the attempt has been consistent. The celebrity appearances that have flooded the later seasons are often cited as evidence of the show's creative decline, and the critique has validity. But the earlier celebrity appearances, in the peak seasons, represent something more interesting than the later ones. Those earlier appearances used famous people to say something specific about fame, about the relationship between public image and private reality, about the particular American relationship to celebrity as a substitute for other kinds of meaning. When the celebrity appearances became more decorative and less pointed, what was lost was not simply a difference in quality, it was a difference in intention. The show stopped using celebrity as a subject and started using it as a resource. The floating timeline is the show's most profound structural statement about America. The characters do not age because they are the American family, and the American family, as cultural mythology constructs it, is not permitted to age. Homer must be middle-aged, Marge must be patient, Bart must be rebellious, Lisa must be idealistic, Maggie must be silent. The dynamic must be preserved because the dynamic is the product, and the product is the version of American family life that the culture built around this show and that the show has been reflecting back ever since. If The Simpsons aged, if Bart went to college and Lisa moved away and Maggie finally spoke and Homer retired, the show would become an elegy. It would become the story of a family that ran out of time. That story is available. The show has glimpsed it in flash-forward episodes, but it has never told it, because telling it would require the culture to admit that this version of American domestic life was always temporary, always fragile, always one birthday away from becoming something we would have to grieve. Springfield is everywhere and nowhere, every American town that has ever worried about its future and nowhere that any specific viewer has ever actually lived. It has oceanfront property and mountain ranges and deserts and active volcanoes all within driving distance. It borders Ohio and Nevada and Maine and Kentucky, depending on which episode you are watching. It is located on the coast and in the heartland, and near Canada and near Mexico. No real town has this geography. Springfield does, because Springfield is not a place on a map. It is a place in the imagination, and in the imagination, geography follows feeling rather than coordinates. What Springfield finally is, across all the hidden details and all the seasons and all the hours that have been spent in it by people watching from wherever they are watching, is a mirror. Not a flattering one and not a distorting one. The kind that shows you what is actually there with a clarity that is only available at some slight distance from the thing being reflected. It shows America to America, and what America sees there has been, for 36 years, both alarming and comforting, both what we are afraid we are and what we hope we might manage to be. The cooling towers are still leaning. The house on Evergreen Terrace is still lit. Homer is asleep on the couch, the television still on, the blue light moving across his face. Marge has covered him with the blanket kept there for exactly this purpose. Bart is upstairs, probably reading something he would not admit to, probably more awake than he should be. Lisa has fallen asleep with a book on her face and the saxophone case open on the floor beside her bed. Maggie is awake in her crib, watching the dark with those enormous patient eyes, assembling from the available evidence a picture she has not yet found the words for. The town breathes. The plant runs. The details are all still there, in every frame, patient as the animators who place them, waiting for the right hour and the right quality of attention. Good night. The opening sequence repays attention even after you have seen it hundreds of times. The camera enters Springfield from above and sweeps through the town in a specific path that has been maintained across every variation of the opening over the decades. It passes the nuclear plant. It passes the elementary school. It passes downtown Springfield and the residential neighborhoods. The path is not random. It describes a specific relationship between these locations, a hierarchy of what Springfield is organized around, and the nuclear plant is always in the first position. The town radiates outward from that building even in the sequence designed to celebrate the town as a home. The title card itself, the word mark that appears over the opening credits, has been redesigned several times over the show's run, updated to reflect changes in production technology and in the visual language of the era. But it has always maintained a specific quality of handmade friendliness, a slight informality that positions the show as warm and accessible rather than polished and corporate. The letters in the title are not perfectly uniform. They have a human quality, the quality of something drawn by hand rather than generated by a computer, and this quality has been maintained even as the production around it became increasingly digital. The shadow of the cooling towers falls across the Springfield skyline in establishing shots with a consistency that requires deliberate placement. The towers are upwind and uphill from much of the residential area, and in shots where the light is positioned correctly, their shadows extend over the houses and the streets and the school. This is a compositional choice that communicates something specific without stating it. The town exists in the shadow of the plant. The families going about their daily lives are doing so in a space that the plant's physical presence perpetually defines. The shadow is always there. Most viewers stop registering it the same way the characters stop registering the towers themselves, which is its own form of commentary. The specific rendering of food in the show is one of the most lovingly detailed aspects of its visual production. Homer's food, in particular, has been drawn with a care that goes well beyond functional prop design. The donuts have a specific anatomy, a specific ratio of glazed surface to dough interior, a specific pink frosting applied at a specific angle that is consistent across decades of animation. The beer in the Duff cans has a specific color. The hamburgers at Krusty Burger have a specific construction. The food of Springfield is not generic. It is specific, and it is specific in ways that communicate something about the character of the person eating it and the kind of place they are eating it in. Homer's food exists in a register of cheerful excess. The school cafeteria food exists in a register of institutional defeat. The food at Burns Manor exists in a register of formality so extreme that it has crossed over into something approaching parody of itself. The treatment of night in the show is consistently its most visually ambitious register. The Springfield palette, which in daylight is organized around bright yellows and primary colors, transforms at night into something considerably richer and more complex. The blue deepens toward indigo. The greens of the plant become more saturated. The warm interior light of the houses, visible through windows in establishing shots, creates pools of amber against the dark that have a quality almost of invitation, as if these lit interiors are the only warmth available in a very large dark. The night episodes have a visual vocabulary that is different enough from the day episodes to feel like a different show set in the same location, which is exactly what night is. The design of Burns Manor deserves more attention than it usually receives as a piece of architectural characterization. The building is large and explicitly Gothic in its visual references, but it is Gothic in the American way, which is to say it is Gothic filtered through the specific American relationship to European aristocratic tradition. Borrowed, slightly misunderstood, used as a performance of a kind of cultural authority that the American context cannot quite sustain. Burns does not live in a castle because he is European. He lives in a building that is supposed to look like a castle because he is the kind of American who believes that living in something castle adjacent says something important about who you are. The building is an argument about status, dressed up as a residence. The visual language of the school deserves its own consideration because it is where Bart and Lisa spend most of their depicted daytime hours, and because the school's visual environment is doing specific character work. The institutional green of the walls, the fluorescent overhead lights that flatten everything beneath them. The specific design of the desks, arranged in rows facing forward in the traditional arrangement of education as transmission rather than education as conversation. The building communicates a philosophy of learning before any lesson is taught in it, and the philosophy it communicates is one of compliance and uniformity rather than curiosity and growth. Lisa suffers in this environment, and the visual language of the space explains why without requiring the show to say it directly. The crayon episode is worth spending more time with because it does something that the show rarely does anywhere else. It shows you what Homer might have been. Smart Homer is not an alternative character. He is the same person with the fog lifted, and what the fog's absence reveals is not a different man but a more complete version of the man who already exists in the foggy version. He is more articulate. He makes connections more readily. He processes the world with a facility that his usual cognitive state does not permit, and he is miserable. Not because intelligence is bad, but because intelligence in Springfield is a form of loneliness that compounds with everything you understand that the people around you cannot follow. The letter to Lisa that Smart Homer writes before having the crayon reinserted is one of the most quietly devastating pieces of writing in the entire series. He tells her that she deserves better than the father she has been given. He tells her that he sees her clearly, perhaps for the first time, and that what he sees is worth far more than Springfield has any mechanism for accommodating. He tells her to keep going. The letter is specific and tender in ways that his daily behavior almost never achieves, and he writes it knowing that the version of himself capable of writing it is about to be deliberately ended. He is writing a goodbye from the self that can love her the way she needs to be loved to the self that will continue being present in her life. It is one of the saddest things the show ever produced, presented with almost no weight, surrounded by comedy that prevents you from fully feeling it until later. Homer's relationship with his job, divorced from the comedy of his incompetence, is one of the show's most sustained explorations of American working life. He has been doing the same job in the same location for the entirety of his depicted adult life. He has never been meaningfully promoted. He has never significantly advanced. He has had other jobs in various episodes, many of them, hundreds of different occupations across the series, but he always returns to Sector 7G. The plant is his professional permanent address, and he has made a kind of peace with it, which is the specific peace of someone who has stopped expecting their work to be more than it is and who takes what satisfaction is available within what has been given to them. The donut, the chair, the particular quality of the afternoon in that specific location. He has found a way to be content inside a life that did not go where the young Homer might have imagined it going, and this contentment is both a triumph of adaptation and a loss of something that cannot be named without making it into a complaint. The show gives Homer a recurring motif that most viewers register without identifying. When something genuinely beautiful happens in his vicinity, he pauses. Not for long. A few seconds at most. The comedy will resume shortly. But in those few seconds, something passes through him that is recognizable as wonder, as the specific quality of attention that beauty demands from people who are still capable of receiving it. A sunset seen from the right angle. Music that finds him when his defenses are down. His children laughing in the yard at something he cannot hear from where he is standing. In those moments, Homer is entirely present, entirely in the experience, and entirely himself in a way that the normal busyness of the show rarely permits. These are the moments that make him worth spending time with. His relationship with food deserves more careful attention than the comedy of appetite usually invites. Homer does not eat mindlessly. He eats with a specific quality of attention and pleasure that is one of the few areas of his life where his engagement is total and uncomplicated. He is present when he eats in a way that he is not always present in other areas of his life. The food receives the full Homer, unfiltered by self-consciousness or anxiety or the particular fog that compromises his engagement with things that require sustained cognition. This is not a small thing. Most people spend most of their lives only partially present in their experiences. Homer is fully present in his relationship with a good donut, and there is something genuine and even instructive in that completeness, even if the donut itself is not the most nutritionally dignified object of complete attention. The episodes where Homer demonstrates unexpected competence are among the show's most interesting precisely because they contradict the established character without undermining it. He can cook. He can fish with real skill. He has demonstrated capabilities in specific domains that his general reputation for incompetence would not predict. These moments of competence are always in areas where the competence was never expected, areas that fall outside the formal evaluation systems that have defined him as a failure. The evaluations that matter in his world measure him on things he cannot do. The things he can do are not measured. This is an accurate portrait of a specific kind of human experience, of the person whose actual capabilities never quite overlap with the capabilities that the available systems recognize and reward. The painting that Marge produces when she discovers her talent is worth thinking about in terms of what she chooses to paint. She does not paint her family. She does not paint the domestic environment she spends most of her time inside. She paints something she sees outside herself, something that exists in the world independent of her role within the household. The choice of subject is itself a form of liberation, a declaration that Marge Bouvier has a relationship with the visible world that is separate from and prior to her relationship with the Simpson household. The painting belongs to her in the way that nothing in the house belongs to her, because it came from something in her that the house did not produce. Her relationship with the church is quieter than Ned's and more consistent than Homer's, and reveals something specific about her character. She goes because she finds something there. Not the theatrical certainty of Ned's faith, not the transactional prayer of Homer's occasional appeals to divine assistance, but something more private and more habitual, a framework that helps her organize her experience of the world into something she can live inside without being overwhelmed by its accumulating weight. The church is where Marge goes to maintain the internal architecture that allows her to be who she is in the rest of her life. Nobody in the show comments on this because it is too quiet to comment on. It happens and it continues to happen, and the show respects it by not making it a story. The specific dynamic between Marge and her mother, which the show develops across several episodes, reveals the origin of some of Marge's most deeply held qualities. Jacqueline Bouvier is a woman whose expectations for her daughters were specific and whose satisfaction with what they became has been qualified. The Marge who emerged from that household carried with her a particular orientation toward approval and toward the proper performance of the roles available to women of her generation. She has been performing those roles with considerable competence for her entire adult life, and what the show occasionally surfaces is the question of whether the performance has ever been allowed to be evaluated on its own terms, rather than simply assumed to be the natural order of things. The version of Marge that appears in the Vegas episode, the one where she briefly escapes the domestic routine and discovers that she is capable of a different quality of spontaneity, is one of the show's most quietly radical depictions of her character. It is not that she becomes someone else. It is that she becomes a more complete version of herself, someone who has temporarily set down the specific performance that the household requires and found, under it, a Marge who can surprise herself. The episode does not pursue what this means. It returns her to the routine, but the glimpse is there, available to anyone who watched it, and the show's willingness to show it at all is significant. The episode where Bart receives a failing grade and is told he may be held back presents one of the show's most careful explorations of what the armor costs when it fails. For most of the episode, he performs his usual indifference to academic evaluation. And then the performance breaks and he is simply a child who has been told he is not good enough and who cannot find the emotional distance to convert the verdict into rebellion. He sits with it. The show sits with him. The comedy is almost entirely absent for those few minutes, which is how you know the show is reaching for something real. The failure is real. The pain of it is real. The temporary absence of the armor that makes the pain visible is the most honest thing the episode does. His prank phone calls to Moe represent the show's simplest and most consistent illustration of what his intelligence actually looks like when it is functioning. The calls require him to understand how linguistic expectations work, how the setup of a certain kind of request creates a predictable interpretation that can then be violated by a second, meaning the listener did not anticipate. This is fairly sophisticated comedic construction. The average 10-year-old cannot reliably produce it. Bart can produce it consistently and has been producing it for decades. He is using the specific cognitive tools that would make him effective in many contexts, on the only context that welcomes them without requiring him to demonstrate that he belongs there first. The relationship between Bart and his skateboard extends beyond the obvious symbolism of freedom and risk. There is a physical relationship there, a knowledge of how the board behaves under different conditions, a body memory accumulated across years of riding it that represents one of the few forms of genuine mastery in his life. He is good at this. The skateboard goes where he directs it. His body knows things in relation to this object that his formal education has never allowed him to know about anything. And the confidence that comes from mastery of something, any something, is legible in how he carries himself when the board is nearby. The board is not just transportation. It is the space where Bart is competent and knows it. His relationship with the adults who actually reach him, who manage to get through the performance of not caring, is one of the show's most interesting recurring explorations. The substitute teacher episode, the one where a charismatic and genuinely gifted educator briefly captures Bart's attention and interest and then leaves, is a small tragedy about the specific experience of finding the right person at the wrong time. Bart is available to this teacher in a way he is not available to Skinner. The education works, the teacher leaves. Bart returns to being the person he is in the absence of teaching that meets him where he is, and the return is painful in a way the show handles with more seriousness than the comedy surrounding it would predict. The specific music Lisa plays when the show gives it screen time has been written with genuine musical care rather than simply used as ambient sound. In the episodes where her saxophone playing is prominent, the composition reflects her emotional state with a precision that rewards listeners who pay attention to it. The music she plays when she is sad has a different harmonic quality from the music she plays when she is content, and neither of those is the same as the music she plays when she is working through something. When the playing itself is the process of understanding rather than the expression of an understanding already arrived at, the saxophone is her primary cognitive tool. She thinks with it in a way that she cannot always think with words. Her relationship with Buddhism, introduced in a later season, is handled with more seriousness than the show's comedic framing would require and deserves more credit than it receives. The conversion is not satirized. It is not presented as a phase or as the punchline of an episode about spiritual seeking. It is depicted as a genuine spiritual development in a character who has always been in search of a framework adequate to what she feels and what she perceives. Buddhism offers Lisa something that Springfield's other available frameworks cannot: a practice organized around attention and compassion rather than around performance and judgment. The show lets her have it and maintains it, which is a form of character respect that is not as common in long-running television as it should be. The episodes that pair Lisa with a role model who then disappoints her are some of the show's most emotionally precise explorations of her psychology. She is a person who invests significantly in admiration, who needs to believe that the qualities she most values in herself are possible at higher levels of development than she has yet achieved, and who is repeatedly confronted with the specific disappointment of finding that people who have achieved what she aspires to have done so imperfectly, or have other qualities that complicate the admiration she wants to give them cleanly. She keeps reaching for exemplars and keeps finding humans. The reaching itself is the thing the show is most interested in preserving, because Lisa without the reaching would not be Lisa. The show's depiction of Lisa at school, surrounded by other children who cannot follow where she is trying to go, is one of its most sustained portraits of a specific kind of loneliness. She is not disliked, exactly. She is simply other, in a way that makes ordinary childhood social connection require more effort from both parties than most children are willing to consistently provide. The other children respect her in a distant way and do not know what to do with her, which is its own form of isolation, being present and seen and still fundamentally unreachable by the relationships available in the room. Lisa has been living inside this particular configuration of social life for 36 years. She keeps trying anyway. The trying is one of the best things about her. The teachers of Springfield Elementary constitute an ensemble, that the show has returned to consistently without ever quite making the center of a sustained storyline. Mrs. Krabappel, who Marcia Wallace voiced until her death in 2013, was one of the show's most effectively drawn supporting characters. She arrived at her classroom with different expectations than what she found there, and made a pragmatic accommodation to the gap between what she hoped teaching would be and what it actually was in this specific location with these specific resources and these specific children. Her relationship with Bart was the show's best sustained depiction of the teacher-student dynamic that the classroom creates. Genuine antagonism built on genuine recognition, mutual frustration built on mutual acknowledgement that neither of them was quite what the situation called for. Sideshow, Bob's family, introduced in later seasons, adds a layer of complexity to his characterization that his earlier villain arc did not require, but that the show developed with more care than was necessary. His brother Cecil, his parents, the accumulated evidence of a family that produced someone with Bob's specific combination of high culture and homicidal fixation suggests a background of achievement and expectation that Bob both internalized and failed to satisfy through legitimate means. He is overqualified for villainy in the specific way that people who were promised something larger than what their circumstances delivered are overqualified for their actual situation. The tragedy of Bob is the tragedy of capability without adequate outlet, redirected toward destruction because the constructive applications were not available to him. The Wiggum family dynamic, centered on Chief Wiggum's relationship with his son Ralph, represents the show's warmest, sustained depiction of parental love in its supporting cast. Ralph exists in a state of perpetual cognitive independence from consensus reality, saying things that have no obvious relationship to the situation at hand, and that sometimes, from a different angle, have a relationship to something the situation is not discussing. Wiggum loves him with a completeness and a lack of complication that the show consistently depicts as genuine. He is a bad police chief and a genuinely good father, which is one of the show's more interesting implicit arguments about the relationship between professional performance and personal character. The qualities that make him ineffective at his job, the cheerful obliviousness, the resistance to inconvenient information, are the same qualities that make him uncomplicated in his love for his son. The connection between these things is not accidental. Springfield schoolchildren, taken as an ensemble, are a remarkably varied depiction of American childhood across a spectrum of circumstances and capacities. Nelson's specific vulnerability, the toughness built over a childhood of inadequate care, is handled with more delicacy than his role as the neighborhood bully would seem to require. Martin's social suffering at the hands of a school culture that penalizes visible enthusiasm for learning is depicted with enough specificity to feel observed rather than invented. Milhouse's position as the child most subject to the social dynamics around him, most easily influenced and most willing to follow wherever the current takes him, is one of the show's most accurate portraits of a certain kind of childhood passivity. These children are not props. They are recognizable types who have been developed into specific individuals across years of background appearances. The specific way Burns processes information about the people around him is one of the show's most consistent and most revealing character details. He does not see individuals. He sees functions. The safety inspector whose name he cannot remember is the safety inspector, a role, a position in a hierarchy, not a person with a name and a family and a history. This is not simple forgetfulness. It is a form of attention organized entirely around utility. The person in front of Burns has a relationship to Burns's interests, or they do not. If they do, they are recognized in those terms. If they do not, they pass through his attention without registering. Homer has been in his employ for decades and does not register because Homer's function, as Burns understands it, is to be incompetent, and incompetence does not require a name. His relationship with the historical figures he encountered across his long life, referenced in various episodes, gives him a quality that no other Springfield character possesses: genuine historical continuity. He was there. He knew people whose names are in textbooks. He has lived long enough to have personal relationships with multiple distinct eras of American history, to have experienced firsthand events that everyone else in the show knows only through cultural mediation. This gives his contempt for the present a specific quality that distinguishes it from ordinary curmudgeonliness. He is not simply old. He is a man who has watched everything he considers worth valuing recede into the past, and who has survived into a present he does not recognize and does not respect, sustained by the infrastructure of wealth he built in the time when the world still made sense to him. The medical maintenance that keeps Burns operational is the show's most interesting ongoing metaphor. He is not alive in the way that other people are alive, through the ordinary functioning of biological systems that were designed for this purpose. He is alive because he has been maintaining himself the way one maintains machinery, through scheduled interventions and resource expenditure, and the vigilance of someone who understands that the system he is managing has been running far past its design tolerances for a very long time. Burns is the most self-aware character on the show in one specific sense. He knows exactly what he is and what it costs to remain it. The weekly treatments are not a burden. They are the price of continuation, paid without complaint, because the alternative is not available to a man who built his entire life around the proposition that continuation is non-negotiable. The plant's safety culture, as depicted across its many background appearances, is the culture of normalized risk. This is a real phenomenon in industrial environments. The gradual process by which procedures that were originally adopted in response to specific hazards become routine, and then rote, and then invisible, until the hazard they were designed to address is no longer visible to the people working around it. Springfield's plant workers have been working in an environment where the abnormal is normal for so long that the abnormal has become invisible to them. The glowing waste drums, the cracked coolant lines, the readings that are technically outside acceptable parameters but that have been outside those parameters for so long that the out-of-parameter reading has become the expected reading. This is not malice. This is adaptation. And adaptation is one of the most dangerous qualities a safety culture can develop. Blinky the three-eyed fish is the plant's most publicly visible output and the piece of evidence that the show treats most directly as evidence before demonstrating how quickly evidence can be absorbed and forgotten. The fish was national news. The fish was the basis of a gubernatorial campaign. The fish was eaten on television by the man responsible for producing it in a performance of harmlessness that the television audience apparently found sufficient. And then the story moved on. The fish are still in the river. The environmental conditions that produce the three-eyed fish have not changed. But the news cycle completed its rotation and returned to other subjects, and Blinky became a bit of Springfield folklore rather than an ongoing public health concern. The show introduced this story in Season 2 and has been living with its implications ever since, without ever returning to the question of what happened to all the other fish. The relationship between the plant and Springfield's municipal government is one of the show's most accurate depictions of the political economy of a company town. Mayor Quimby's corruption is not simply personal moral failing. It is the logical output of a system in which the largest employer in town has more resources and more sustained interest in municipal decision-making than anyone else in the community. Burns has outlasted multiple mayoral administrations. He has outlasted every political figure who has ever tried to make an issue of the plant's operations. He has been lobbying, donating, threatening, and influencing Springfield's political environment for longer than most of Springfield's residents have been alive. The corruption is not an aberration in this system. The corruption is how the system sustains itself. The production codes embedded in the background of certain episodes are visible to the viewer who knows what they are looking for. Documentation from the production process that occasionally survives into the finished product. These are not Easter eggs in the deliberate sense. They are traces, the fingerprints of the production process left visible on the surface of the finished work. Animation is not a medium where the making is normally visible in the made thing. When traces of the process appear in a Simpsons episode, they are there because someone decided they were there, or because the verification process that would have caught them was not looking at exactly that frame. Either way, they are there, and they are one of the ways the show reveals the human beings behind it. The background characters who appear across the Springfield crowd scenes are more consistent than they might appear to be. A careful viewer can learn to recognize specific, unnamed figures across multiple episodes, people who have clearly been given visual identities by the production team without being given names or storylines. There is a woman in a pink hat who appears in Springfield crowd scenes in many different contexts across many different seasons. There is a man in a blue jacket who stands near the back of public gatherings. They have been drawn, they have been placed, They appear again and again, and the show has never given them a name or a storyline. They are simply people who live in Springfield, who show up to the things that Springfield residents show up to, who are there in the background of the town's public life without explanation or acknowledgement. The books in the school library, visible in background shots of the classroom scenes, have titles and sometimes author names that are legible in specific frames. The reading list they suggest for Springfield Elementary is a mixture of genuine classic literature and titles that are clearly invented for the specific context of the scene, books that comment on what is happening in the episode without making the commentary explicit. This is a form of background writing that requires the writer to think about the episode's themes clearly enough to produce relevant alternative texts, to imagine what someone who knew what this episode was about might put on a library shelf. The background library is a piece of secondary criticism of the episode it appears in, and it is there in the background where most viewers will never see it. The specific way music resolves at the end of scenes in The Simpsons is one of the most consistent and least noticed aspects of its sonic construction. The show uses music to manage emotional transitions between scenes with a care that most viewers register only as a general sense of the scenes flowing properly. A comedic scene that ends on a joke will have a musical tag that confirms the joke's completion and prepares the viewer for the next scene's different emotional register. An emotional scene will have underscoring that does not resolve too cleanly, that leaves a small amount of harmonic tension in the air as the scene cuts away, so that the feeling carries into whatever comes next rather than being neatly concluded and filed. This management of musical resolution is part of why the show's tonal shifts between comedy and genuine feeling feel earned rather than jarring. The Homer's Barbershop Quartet episode is the most complete single-episode demonstration of the show's musical ambitions. It required the production team to write and record original material in a specific historical musical style, to integrate that material into a narrative about the creative process and its relationship to commercial success and personal identity, and to do all of this while maintaining the show's comic sensibility without letting the comedy prevent the music from working as music. The episode succeeds at all of these things simultaneously, which is an unusual achievement for any television production. The songs in that episode are good songs. They would be recognizable as good songs without the comedic context. The show was reaching for something real musically and found it. The way silence is used in the show, the specific moments when the music drops out entirely and leaves only ambient sound or nothing at all, is as expressive as the moments where the music is most present. The show knows when to stop. When a scene reaches a moment of genuine weight, a moment that the comedy has been leading toward and that deserves to land with full force, the music often goes quiet and lets the moment exist in its own space, without underscoring telling the viewer how to feel about it. These silences are among the show's most carefully placed elements, and they are the places where the show most directly trusts its audience to know how to be present in a moment without being directed. The way relationships age without the characters aging is one of the show's most sophisticated achievements in characterization across time. Homer and Marge in a season 20 episode relate to each other with the weight of 20 seasons of their relationship behind them, even though the floating timeline means that they have not been alive for 20 additional years. The accumulated history is in the performances rather than in the text. Castellaneta and Kavner know who these people are to each other after decades of voicing them together, and that knowledge inflects how they play the scenes in ways that the scripts cannot fully capture. The relationship is older than any single episode acknowledges. The age is real. The specific objects that have persisted across many seasons in the Simpson house are a form of continuity that rewards the attentive viewer. The painting of a bowl of fruit in the kitchen, which has been visible in kitchen scenes across many different seasons, has been in the same location on the same wall for decades. The family photographs on the mantelpiece have been updated at various points, and the updates are visible if you compare episodes from different periods. The television set in the living room has changed over the years in ways that reflect the actual evolution of television technology, updating from the older box-style set to something that reflects more contemporary screen design, while maintaining its position as the altar at the center of the domestic space. These objects have histories. They have been in that house for a long time. The continuity of Springfield's civic history, accumulated across episodes that touch on local politics and community events and the town's relationship to its own past, produces a version of municipal history that is detailed enough to be internally consistent, even when it is not literally consistent with every episode's specific claims. Springfield has had elections. It has had civic disasters. It has had moments of collective achievement and moments of collective disgrace that are part of its character as a town, even when they are not referenced. The town has a past that extends before the first episode and that the show has been gradually revealing across its entire run, and the accumulated past gives Springfield a quality of having been somewhere before the show arrived, of being a place with a history rather than a set with a backstory. The show's relationship to the working class has been one of its most consistent political threads and one of the least discussed aspects of its cultural politics. Springfield is not a comfortable place. The families who live there are not insulated from economic precarity by the comfortable buffers of middle-class abundance. Homer's job anxiety in the episodes where his employment is threatened is not comedic in its emotional substance. It is the anxiety of someone who understands that the stability of his family depends on a specific paycheck from a specific employer and that the loss of that paycheck would not be recoverable through any of the obvious mechanisms. The show understands what it means to need your job in a specific and non-abstract way, and it has been depicting that understanding since the first season. The specific forms of civic dysfunction depicted in Springfield have become more recognizable as descriptions of the actual country across the decades the show has been running. The incompetent police department that prioritizes the wrong things and serves the powerful rather than the vulnerable. The municipal government organized around personal enrichment rather than public service. The educational system underfunded to the point where the people working inside it are doing their best within constraints that make their best insufficient. The media environment that amplifies conflict and simplifies complexity and provides entertainment in the place of information. The show identified all of these features of American civic life and built Springfield's specific institutions around them in the early 1990s, and the country has not moved away from what the show was describing. If anything, the distance between Springfield and the description it was parodying has narrowed. The nostalgia that runs through the show is one of its most American qualities. Springfield is a town that has a complicated relationship with its own past, that maintains monuments to things that no longer exist, and institutions that have outlived their original purposes, and that is perpetually in the process of deciding what to keep and what to release from the version of itself it wants to. Remember, this is the American relationship to the past in concentrated form, a mixture of genuine affection for what has been lost and unwillingness to examine what the loss reveals about what is still here. Springfield remembers what it wants to remember and adjusts the memory to fit the version of itself it needs to believe in, which is exactly what communities do, which is why Springfield feels like somewhere you already know, even if you have never been to a town that looks anything like it. The question of what Springfield's children will inherit, what world Bart and Lisa and Maggie will grow up into when the show finally allows them to grow up, is one that the flash-forward episodes address with varying degrees of optimism. The Lisa's wedding episode imagines a future for her that is recognizably continuous with who she is. A future where she has achieved something and is still reaching for more, still slightly lonely, still playing the saxophone, still herself in a version of the world that has changed around her without changing the core of who she is. The Bart episodes that imagine him as an adult are more complicated, more conditional, more dependent on which version of his potential the future managed to activate. Both of these futures feel earned. Both of them feel true to who these children are. The show can see where they are going even if it has decided not to take them there. Springfield will keep running. The cooling towers will keep leaning. Homer will keep sleeping at his station and waking up just in time and coming home to the house on Evergreen Terrace where the family will be waiting, imperfectly and reliably, the way families wait. Marge will keep maintaining the hair and the household and the version of herself she decided to be when she was young enough for the decision to feel absolute. Bart will keep reaching for the skateboard and the prank, and the version of himself that the available structures have never quite been able to contain. Lisa will keep playing the saxophone in the evenings when the words are not enough, which is most evenings, and the music will go where it goes. Maggie will keep watching, enormous-eyed and patient, assembling her picture of the world with a thoroughness and a care that nobody has yet noticed. This is what is hiding inside every episode of The Simpsons. Not just the Easter eggs and the background jokes and the titles of the books on the shelves. Not just the eyebrow language and the leaning towers and the four fingers and the five-fingered hands of God. What is hiding inside every episode is a genuine portrait of a specific version of American life, rendered in a language that makes it visible precisely because the language is not realistic, because the cartoon expressiveness and the comedy and the yellow skin give you the emotional distance to see something clearly that you might not be able to look at directly if it were presented to you without the distance. The show has been offering this portrait for 36 years, in the background of the jokes and in the spaces between the laughs, and most of it has been there the whole time, waiting for the viewer who is paying close enough attention, the viewer who is willing to slow down and stay with it, which is exactly the kind of viewer that the late hours and the quiet and the willingness to let something wash over you rather than consume it actively tends to produce. Springfield is still there. All the details are still in it. The light in the living room is the blue of the television, moving across Homer's sleeping face. The couch holds him. The family is arranged in the house around him, each in their particular orbit. The town breathes outside, the plant runs. The sky does what skies do in the very late hours, which is exist in a color that has no useful name, a color that belongs specifically to the time between one day and the next, when the dark has been dark long enough to be almost done with it. Good night. Sleep well. Springfield will still be here when you come back, exactly as you left it, which is the last hidden detail and also the whole point. The opening of the show has been watched billions of times across 36 years and it still rewards attention. The specific duration of each shot in the title sequence was calibrated in the early seasons to match the length of Danny Elfman's theme and has been maintained through every variation of the sequence since. When the couch gag is longer than usual, the earlier shots in the sequence are shortened to compensate. When the couch gag is shorter, the sequence expands elsewhere. The whole opening is in a constant subtle negotiation with itself about time, and this negotiation happens every week, invisibly, in the 15 seconds before the episode begins. The clouds in the Springfield sky during the title sequence are not simply atmospheric decoration. They move against the background at a speed and in a direction that suggests a specific quality of weather, a specific relationship to wind and light that gives the establishing shots of the town a sense of being placed in real meteorological conditions rather than against a painted flat. This specificity is not required for the sequence to function. It is there because the people making it believed that the difference between a sky that feels like a real sky and a sky that feels like a painted representation of a sky is worth the effort, even in a sequence that lasts about 90 seconds. The specific palette shift that occurs when the show moves between exterior Springfield and interior Simpson house is one of those visual choices that the viewer registers only as a change in feel. Outside is cooler, more public, more exposed. Inside the house is warmer, more private, the specific warmth of a space that has been occupied by the same family for a long time and that carries that occupancy in its visual texture. The house glows from within in establishing shots taken at dusk or night, and the glow is always warm, always amber, always the color of a light left on for someone expected home. There is a persistent visual joke running through many episodes that involves the relative size of characters within the same frame. The show is not always consistent about the heights of its characters, and the inconsistency is frequently used to create a comedic incongruity in which two characters who are nominally similar in height appear radically different within the same shot, depending on what the composition requires. This is a cartoon convention, the use of scale for comedic and compositional purposes rather than strict anatomical fidelity. But The Simpsons uses it with more deliberateness than most animated series, aware that the unexpected size relationship creates its own visual comedy independent of whatever the characters are doing or saying. The specific visual treatment of the future in flash-forward episodes represents the show's most adventurous departure from its established visual language. When Springfield is depicted 30 years hence, the palette shifts, the character designs age in ways that are recognizable as continuations of the established designs rather than redesigns, and the architectural environment of the town changes in ways that reflect the show's understanding of how American towns change across time. The Springfield of the future looks like Springfield extended rather than Springfield replaced, which is the correct visual intuition about how real places change. They accumulate rather than transform. The treatment of weather across the series is more sophisticated than the show usually gets credit for. Springfield has seasons. It has summer episodes where the heat is visible in the shimmer of the air and the specific quality of light that comes with high temperatures and low humidity, and winter episodes where the cold is present in the palette and in the behavior of the town. The visual language of the seasons has been maintained with reasonable consistency across the show's run, giving Springfield a meteorological life that adds to its sense of being a real place rather than a permanent present. The specific rendering of fire and explosion in the show, which appear frequently given Homer's relationship to industrial safety, is one of its most stylized visual choices. Simpsons' explosions are large and orange and satisfying in a way that bears no relationship to the physics of actual industrial accidents. They are the visual language of cartoon consequence, of disaster made legible and temporary, of destruction that can be contained within the frame and that will be gone by the next episode. The stylization is deliberate, and it functions as a form of promise to the viewer. This explosion is serious within the logic of the scene, but it belongs to a visual vocabulary that does not ask you to carry its weight beyond the episode's end. Homer's history with the church is one of the more interesting long threads in his characterization. He approaches religion with the specific pragmatism of someone who takes the divine seriously as a concept, but relates to the institutional form of that concept with a casual indifference that is more honest than it is disrespectful. He goes to church because Marge goes. He falls asleep during services because the services are long. He prays when he needs something specific and then forgets to follow up when the need passes, which is the relationship most people have with prayer, even when they would not describe it that way. And yet he has had conversations with God. Direct, face-to-face conversations in which God was present and engaged and specific in ways that would seem to require some form of ongoing relationship. The show has never resolved the tension between Homer's casual practice and his apparently genuine access to the divine, which is itself an accurate portrait of how many people relate to their faith. The relationship between Homer and Lenny and Carl, his co-workers and closest friends, is one of the show's most consistently maintained background relationships. Lenny and Carl have been Homer's people at work since the first season. The men who occupy the adjacent stations in the control room, who have lunch with him in the cafeteria, who drink with him at Moe's after work. The friendship is easy in the way of friendships that have lasted long enough to not require explanation. They exist in each other's company without having to justify the existence. This is a specific quality of long friendship that the show captures accurately. The comfort of people who have been in your life long enough to be furniture rather than guests, who are simply there, available, without requiring the effort that newer relationships require. His love of television is one of the most American things about him, and one of the most specific. He watches television with the same total attention that he brings to food, the full-body engagement of someone who is completely present in the experience. He watches things he likes and things he does not like with nearly equal engagement because the watching itself is the point as much as the content. The television is company. The television is the ambient presence of other human beings in a house that might otherwise feel too quiet. The television is the medium through which Homer relates to the world beyond Springfield, absorbing it in the way that many Americans absorb the world, through a screen, in a chair, in the late evening, with the lights low. Homer's relationship with his own mortality is handled across the series with more complexity than the physical comedy of his survival would suggest. He has had episodes where the possibility of his death was genuinely present as a narrative weight rather than as a comedic premise. He responds to these moments not with equanimity, not with philosophical acceptance, but with the specific terror of someone who has things he is not finished with. He is not finished being Marge's husband. He is not finished being his children's father. The unfinished quality of his life, the sense that there is more he needs to do and that the time available to do it is uncertain, is one of the emotional engines running beneath the comedy. Marge's cooking has a specific emotional logic that the show depicts accurately. She cooks for the family every night. The family is rarely more than passingly grateful. The cooking continues anyway, in the same way and with the same quality of attention, because the cooking is not contingent on the gratitude. It is an expression of care that does not require acknowledgement to remain real. This is the specific frustration and the specific dignity of care work in a family context. The care is given whether or not it lands, because the care is not about what comes back from the giving. Marge has understood this about herself for a long time. The family is still working on understanding it. Her relationship with her mother is one of the show's most accurately drawn depictions of the complicated adult continuation of a parent-child relationship. Jacqueline Bouvier is a woman of specific opinions about how her daughter's lives should go, and she has been maintaining those opinions without significant update across a very long period. The Marge who emerges from these interactions carries a specific set of postures and accommodations that she developed as a child and has never fully revised for adult life. The automatic deferences and the particular way she holds herself when the maternal gaze is on her. This is recognizable. Most people have a version of this relationship in some form. The show depicts it without making it a problem to be solved, which is the correct approach to a dynamic that is not going to be solved. The specific quality of Marge's contentment in the episodes where she genuinely is content is one of the show's most carefully rendered emotional states. It is not happiness in the straightforward sense. It is the satisfaction of someone who is doing what she set out to do, maintaining what she committed to maintaining, holding what needs to be held. It is the contentment of completion rather than the contentment of abundance, the specific quietness of someone who has done the day's work and finds the results adequate. This is a more common human emotional experience than the culture's preferred narratives about happiness tend to acknowledge, and Marge's embodiment of it is one of the show's most honest gestures toward ordinary life. Bart's relationship with Skinner is one of the show's most sustained and most honestly written ongoing conflicts. They need each other in a specific way that the antagonism between them obscures. Skinner needs Bart because Bart makes him feel the authority that his position requires him to perform, but that he does not always feel internally. Bart's rebellion confirms the hierarchy that Skinner is supposed to represent. And Bart needs Skinner because Skinner provides the specific kind of institutional resistance that his rebellion requires to be meaningful. A school with no one to resist would leave Bart with nowhere to direct the energy. They are, in a specific and uncomfortable sense, each other's necessary antagonist. The world of Springfield Elementary as Bart experiences, it is a world of constant low-level injustice that the adults who are supposed to be managing it have either normalized or are too exhausted to address. The grading systems that cannot measure what Bart is actually capable of. The disciplinary procedures that address the symptom of his behavior without examining the cause. The social hierarchies among the students that the teachers pretend not to see because intervening would require energy they do not have. Bart moves through this environment with the alert pragmatism of someone who has learned that the official systems are not for him and that he will have to operate in the spaces between them. This is not a failure of character. It is an accurate adaptation to the specific environment he inhabits. His relationship with his father's expectations is complicated by the fact that Homer's expectations have never been clearly articulated. What Homer wants from Bart is never stated precisely because Homer has never worked out precisely what he wants, which is the specific problem of wanting something you cannot name. You cannot satisfy the want because the goal is undefined. Bart has been failing to meet expectations that have never been communicated clearly, which is one of the more honestly depicted forms of familial dysfunction in American television. The inheritance of ambiguous parental disappointment, the sense of falling short of something without being able to determine what the something is. Lisa's relationship with her own intelligence is more complicated than the word prodigy would suggest. She did not choose to be this way. The intelligence arrived as a fact about herself, the way physical characteristics arrive, prior to any decision she made about what kind of person she wanted to be. She has spent her entire depicted life adapting to it, learning to live inside it, figuring out how to be in the world as the specific person she is rather than the person her environment expected. This is not a unique challenge. It is a version of a challenge that every person faces in some form, the negotiation between who you are and what the available world can accommodate. The school band is one of the few institutional contexts in Springfield Elementary where Lisa's abilities are recognized rather than managed. The band teacher, in the episodes where he appears with any depth, is one of the school's genuinely committed educators, a person who cares about music in a way that exceeds his professional obligation and who recognizes in Lisa's ability something worth cultivating. These relationships are brief, and they tend not to be sustained across many episodes, but in the episodes where they exist, they are the most accurate depictions of what education can be when it encounters a specific talent with the right quality of attention. Her relationship with the saxophone as an object, the specific instrument she has been playing for 36 years, is one of the show's most consistent depictions of human attachment to a tool. She knows this instrument. She knows its specific responses, the way it requires slightly different handling in different temperatures, the particular fingering that produces the note she wants, rather than the note that is theoretically correct. The knowledge is in her body rather than in her mind, accumulated across years of playing rather than across years of thinking about playing. The saxophone is the one thing in her life that she has been allowed to be in a sustained relationship with, and the relationship is as rich as 36 years of sustained attention would produce. The secondary relationship between Moe and Homer is worth examining as something more than the standard bartender-regular dynamic. Homer tells Moe things he does not tell Marge. The bar provides a specific social permission for a kind of disclosure that the domestic environment does not make available, the permission to be uncertain or unhappy or confused in front of someone who is not invested in your well-being the way your family is invested in it, who can hear the difficult things without the information changing the fundamental terms of the relationship. This is what bars are for in American social culture, and The Simpsons depicts it accurately, without romanticizing it and without condemning it. The backstories of the Springfield secondary characters, accumulated across many episodes and many seasons, constitute an alternative history of the town that is as detailed as the main family's history and considerably more varied. Apu's journey from graduate student to convenience store owner, Moe's past as a child actor and boxing champion, Barney's pre-alcoholism as a promising student with a clear future ahead of him. Each of these backstories places the current version of the character against an alternative trajectory that the character never took, and the distance between the alternative and the actual is where the show finds its most honest commentary on the gap between potential and circumstance. Chief Wiggum's incompetence as a law enforcement officer is depicted with a consistency that requires careful writing to maintain across many years of episodes. His incompetence has specific textures and specific causes. He is not simply careless or unintelligent. He is a person whose natural orientation toward comfort and toward preserving the existing social order makes him constitutionally unsuited for a role that should require disruption of the existing social order when the existing social order is producing injustice. He will not do the uncomfortable thing. He will not follow the evidence where it leads if the evidence leads somewhere that makes the powerful uncomfortable. These are specific failures with specific causes, and the show has been depicting them with this specificity since the early seasons. The Springfield medical community, as depicted across various health-related episodes, is another of the show's institutional portraits. Dr. Hibbert is a competent physician and a good man who operates within a medical system that has the same relationship to Burns's power that every other Springfield institution has. He treats patients and he does not ask questions about the sources of their conditions, which is not a personal failing but an institutional one. The specific form of not looking that the economic structure of a company town encourages in every professional who depends on the continued goodwill of the company. This is a portrait of medicine as an institution embedded in an economic context, and it is accurate in ways that the medical profession would not celebrate but could not deny. The religious community of Springfield, beyond Ned's personal faith, is depicted with the specific quality of American Protestant Christianity that is more about social belonging than about theological conviction. People attend church in Springfield for the same reasons people attend church in most American towns, because their parents attended, because their neighbors attend, because the rhythm of the week has been organized around it for long enough that the absence would feel like something missing, even to people who cannot articulate exactly what it provides. The Reverend Lovejoy administers this community with the weary competence of someone who went into the ministry for reasons that have mostly been forgotten and who has been maintaining the institutional form of something he once believed in with more energy than he currently has available. The Springfield School Board and its relationship to the school's actual operation is one of the show's most accurate depictions of the political economy of public education. The board makes decisions about the school that reflect the priorities of Springfield's political class rather than the educational needs of Springfield's children. The funding decisions that leave Mrs. Krabappel teaching in a room with inadequate supplies and outdated materials are not accidents or oversights. They are the output of a decision-making process organized around the preferences of people who do not send their children to Springfield Elementary. This is a portrait of how American public education is actually governed, rendered in the cartoon logic of a show that can say this clearly precisely because it is saying it about a fictional town. The history of the Simpson house itself, which the show has explored in various flashback episodes and historical asides, gives the building a quality of accumulated significance that most television homes do not possess. It is the house where Homer and Marge began their marriage. It is the house where 3 children were born and raised. It is the house that has survived dozens of depicted disasters and returned to itself each time, not unchanged, because houses that are lived in change, but recognizable, which is what matters. The house is more than a set. It is a record of a family's time in one place, and the recording is in the walls and the floors and the specific way the light comes through the kitchen window at different times of day. The yard between the Simpson house and the Flanders house is one of the show's most meaningful physical spaces. The fence that divides the properties has been the site of more significant conversations than any other location in the show outside the living room itself. The fence is where Homer and Ned have the exchanges that define their relationship, the conversations that are too exposed for the interior of either house but that require the physical proximity of the property line. The fence is the boundary that makes the conversation possible, while also being the boundary that the conversation is always in some sense about. 2 very different versions of American domestic life, separated by a chain-link fence and a property line, talking to each other across the gap. The road that runs past the Simpson house has been the setting for many of the show's most important arriving and departing scenes. Characters arrive at the Simpson family's life through that road. Characters leave through it. The school bus picks up children at the corner. The family car pulls in and out of the driveway across decades of episodes. The road is the connection between the private world of the house and the public world of Springfield, and the show uses it with the awareness that every arrival and every departure across that threshold is a movement between 2 different kinds of life. The sky over Springfield at different hours has been one of the show's most consistent visual achievements. There is a specific quality to the sky in the early episodes of The Morning in Springfield, before the full day has arrived, when the light is still deciding what color it wants to be and the town has not yet committed to whatever the day will bring. There is a specific quality to the sky at the hour when Homer leaves for work, a slightly reluctant quality, the light of someone who is doing what needs to be done without enthusiasm. And there is the Springfield sky at the end of the day, when the work is done and the family is coming home and the light is doing its warmest and most forgiving thing, the light that makes even the cracked cooling towers look, from a certain angle, almost beautiful. The network of relationships between the show's secondary characters, independent of their connections to the Simpson family, constitutes a Springfield social map that is as detailed as the main family's social world. Moe and Barney have a friendship that predates Homer's arrival at the bar. Wiggum and Skinner have a professional relationship that generates its own ongoing comedy. Ned and his late wife Maude had a marriage that the show depicted with enough specificity to make her death genuinely felt, rather than simply narratively useful. These relationships give Springfield the texture of a town where things have been happening for a long time, where the histories between people are long and complicated and do not require the Simpson family's involvement to be interesting. The specific forms of entertainment that Springfield's residents consume, beyond the television that Homer watches, reflect the specific cultural economy of an American town of this size and income level. The bowling alley, the miniature golf course, the movie theater that shows films that are recognizably Hollywood products without being specific titles. The community events organized around shared civic identity, the festivals and the parades, and the sporting events that bring the town together with a temporary unity that dissolves as soon as the event ends. These entertainment forms give Springfield a cultural life that is recognizably American and recognizably limited, the cultural life of a place where the options are constrained by the available resources, and the shared tastes of a community that is more interested in comfort than in challenge. The way the show handles the passage of real-world time within its fictional present is one of its most interesting ongoing negotiations. The show exists in a permanent now that is always the now of the broadcast date, which means it has had to absorb 36 years of real-world change into a fictional world where the characters do not change. The smartphones that appear in later episodes exist in the same Springfield as the characters who were born before smartphones existed. The cultural references that appear in recent seasons exist in the same Springfield as characters who were already middle-aged when those references subjects were in elementary school. The show manages this through the same mechanism it manages everything else that should not be possible. It simply does not acknowledge the problem, and the audience, by long habit, does not press. The permanent childhood of Bart, Lisa, and Maggie is the show's most radical formal choice, and one that it has never fully owned as a choice. In most long-running shows with child characters, the passage of time is either ignored through the floating timeline or acknowledged through the aging of the characters. The Simpsons chose the floating timeline, which means choosing to keep the children permanently young, and the implications of this choice extend beyond simple narrative convenience. Children who never grow up cannot become adults. They cannot have adult experiences. They cannot develop relationships with their parents that account for the changes that time and growth produce. The Simpson children are locked. They are always reaching toward adulthood and never arriving at it, always at the beginning of the journey and never at any intermediate point on the way. This is either a tragedy or a gift, depending on how you read it, and the show has always been willing to read it both ways simultaneously. Springfield's economy, beyond the nuclear plant, is one of the more carefully developed background elements of the show's world building. There are small businesses and service industries, and the various enterprises that a community of 30,000 people would require to sustain itself. The specific businesses that appear across many episodes, the ones that have become landmarks in the visual vocabulary of the town, have their own histories and their own relationships to the economic life of the community. The Quickie Mart is not simply a convenience store. It is a specific institution in a specific neighborhood with a specific role in the daily life of the people who live nearby. Apu knows his customers. He has been serving many of them for years. The familiarity between him and the people he serves is one of the small, real things the show depicts accurately about the texture of neighborhood commercial life. The question of what Springfield looks like from the outside, to the occasional visitor or the federal official who passes through for some specific purpose, is one the show has addressed in various episodes and consistently handled the same way. Springfield looks wrong. Not dramatically wrong, not obviously a contamination zone, but wrong in the specific way of a place where something has been off for long enough that the wrongness has been absorbed into the normal. The visitor who comes in from outside can sometimes see it. The people who live inside cannot, because they have been calibrating their sense of normal against Springfield's specific baseline for as long as they have been alive. The relationship between the show and its audience is one of the most unusual in the history of American television. The Simpsons created a generation of viewers who grew up with it, who watched it first as children and have continued watching it into adulthood, who now have children of their own who watch it, who carry the show's jokes and characters and situations as part of their cultural furniture in a way that television series almost never achieve. The show is not simply a program for these viewers. It is part of the architecture of how they understand the world, a shared reference point of a depth and specificity that other television cannot match because other television has not been running long enough to accumulate this kind of presence. Springfield is not a fictional town for these viewers. It is a place they know. The question of what the show has meant across all the seasons and all the episodes and all the details hidden in the backgrounds and all the characters developed across decades is one that does not have a single answer and that the show itself has never tried to provide one for. What it has provided, consistently and generously, is the world itself, the visual language, the characters, the town, the sky that changes with the weather of the story. It has put these things in front of its audience for 36 years and trusted the audience to find in them what they needed to find, which is the only thing art can responsibly do and the thing The Simpsons has been doing with more consistency than it usually gets credit for. The cooling towers lean. The house is lit. The family is home. All the hidden details are still there, in every frame, patient as the people who place them, waiting for the right kind of attention at the right kind of hour. There is more Springfield than any single viewing can hold. There is always more. That is the final hidden detail, and it has been true since the first episode, and it will be true in the last one. Good night from Springfield. Sleep well. The visual rhythm of a Simpsons episode follows a pattern that has been consistent across the entire run of the show, and that most viewers have internalized without being able to describe. The cold open, which precedes the main title sequence, establishes the episode's comic premise or the character situation that the episode will develop. It is usually 2 to 4 minutes of material, sometimes loosely connected to the main story and sometimes a completely separate comedic piece that has no narrative relationship to what follows. The cold open exists in a slightly different register from the episode itself, lighter and faster, designed to get the viewer into the comic mode that the episode will then sustain at a slightly more varied pace. After the title sequence, which itself takes about 90 seconds, the episode proper begins and immediately establishes the episode's specific emotional temperature. The Simpsons has always been a show that knows what kind of episode it is within the first few minutes of the episode beginning. A Homer episode has a different opening texture from a Bart episode, from a Marge episode, from a Lisa episode, and even within those categories, the specific situation the episode is building around produces a recognizable initial quality. The show teaches its audience this vocabulary across many episodes, and the longtime viewer responds to it the way you respond to the opening of a piece of music you know well. The first few seconds orient you before the thing you came for has fully arrived. The act breaks, inherited from commercial television's structural requirements, are used in the show with more sophistication than the network mandate would require. The act break is placed at a moment of genuine narrative tension whenever possible, not simply at a convenient pause in the story. The best act breaks in the show's history leave you in a state of genuine curiosity about what comes next, invested in the situation enough that the commercial interruption feels like an imposition rather than a natural resting point. This is a skill of pacing and structure that the show developed in the early seasons and has maintained as a production value even in periods where other aspects of the show's quality were less consistent. The tag, the brief scene after the episode's apparent resolution, is one of the show's most interesting structural elements. The tag exists in a temporal space that is outside the episode's main narrative after the central situation has been resolved, in the small space before the credits roll. The best Simpsons tags use this liminal position to say something true about the characters that the episode's narrative did not have space for, or to undercut the episode's apparent resolution in a way that acknowledges the ongoing reality behind it. The problem has been solved, and then the tag reminds you that the thing behind the problem, the thing that produced it, is still there, still running, still the same. Springfield persists. The show's relationship to its own genre is one of its most interesting ongoing negotiations. It is a family sitcom, and it has been a family sitcom for 36 years, which means it has been navigating the specific conventions of that genre for the entirety of its existence. The family sitcom has expectations. The family faces a problem, the problem is addressed, the episode ends with the family more or less intact, and the status quo more or less restored. The Simpsons has worked within these expectations with enough consistency to sustain its position as a family comedy, while also working against them with enough regularity to maintain a critical perspective on the form it inhabits. The episodes that most fully honor the sitcom conventions and the episodes that most directly subvert them are both part of the show's identity, and the relationship between them is part of what makes it more interesting than either a pure example of the genre or a pure parody of it. The show's use of the flashback is one of its most distinctive formal techniques and one of the most revealing about its relationship to time and character. The Simpsons uses flashbacks not to provide exposition or to clarify narrative confusion, but to explore the emotional histories of its characters, to show how the people they are now emerged from specific earlier versions of themselves under specific earlier circumstances. The flashbacks are not just backstory. They are character archaeology, digs into the layers beneath the current surface, excavations of the experiences that produce the particular configuration of character that the present-day episodes depict. The show is always interested in the before, in the prior versions of its characters that continue to operate as pressure on the current versions even when they are not directly visible. The show's relationship to American popular culture is one of its most extensive and most consistent forms of engagement. It has been commenting on, parodying, celebrating, and criticizing American popular culture since 1989, which means it has been doing so across one of the most rapidly changing periods in American cultural history. The cultural landscape of 1989 and the cultural landscape of 2025 are radically different. and the show has had to navigate both while maintaining its own identity as a coherent cultural object. That it has done this while remaining recognizably the same show is one of the more remarkable achievements in the history of American television. And the consistency of its voice across these very different cultural contexts is a testament to the strength of its foundational character work. Homer's relationship with his car is one of those ongoing background character threads that rewards attention across many episodes. The car is where he does some of his most private thinking. The drive to work, in the episodes where it appears, has a specific quality of contemplative solitude that Homer rarely achieves elsewhere. Alone in the car, between the house and the plant, he is temporarily in a space where neither the demands of the family nor the demands of the job can reach him, and in this space he sometimes becomes briefly more thoughtful, more present to his own experience, more available to the kind of reflection that his usual environments do not accommodate. The commute is not simply transportation. It is one of the few forms of solitude available to a man who is never quite alone. His relationship with beer is handled with more care than the comedy of it would suggest requires. Homer drinks Duff the way some people drink coffee, as a ritual that marks time and provides a consistent sensory experience against which the variation of the day can be measured. The beer at Moe's after work is the end of the workday. The beer on the couch watching television is the specific pleasure of having nowhere to be and no one requiring anything. The beer that Homer reaches for in moments of stress is a form of self-medication that the show depicts without either condemning or endorsing. It is simply what Homer does, part of the specific texture of his life, handled consistently enough across seasons to feel like a genuine character trait rather than a comedy shorthand. The specific quality of Homer's intelligence in the domains where it functions is one of the show's most interesting ongoing observations. He is not uniformly unintelligent. He is specifically unintelligent in the domains that the formal evaluation systems around him measure, and specifically capable in others. He can navigate social situations with a directness and an effectiveness that a more self-conscious person could not achieve, because he does not monitor himself closely enough to become inhibited. He can find solutions to practical problems through a willingness to try things that a more risk-averse person would not attempt. He is constitutionally incapable of certain forms of sustained abstract reasoning and constitutionally suited to certain forms of immediate practical problem-solving, and the show has depicted both of these consistently across its entire run. Marge's relationship with the phone, the conversations she has with friends and family that happen in the background of episodes or that frame episodes without being their central subject, is one of the show's most accurate depictions of the social labor that holds communities together, and that is rarely recognized as labor. She calls people. She checks in. She maintains the network of relationships that keeps the family connected to the broader community of Springfield in ways that the family's more public figures do not maintain. Without this work, which is invisible in the way that maintenance work is always invisible until it stops being done, the Simpsons family would be more isolated than they appear to be. Marge is the social infrastructure. The family runs on her maintenance of it. The specific texture of Marge's morality is one of the show's most carefully rendered and most American character elements. She is a person with a strong and specific moral code that is more intuitive than philosophical, more practiced than reasoned. She knows what is right in any given situation not because she has worked through the relevant ethical framework, but because she has a finely calibrated moral instinct that has been producing reliable results for a long time. When the moral instinct fails, which it occasionally does, the failure is interesting specifically because it contradicts such a consistent track record. The show explores these failures with more care than the comedy of them would require, because Marge's moral authority is one of the structural elements of the show, and compromising it has real narrative consequences. Bart's relationship with his own reputation is one of the show's more accurately observed psychological portraits. He has built a reputation as a troublemaker, and he maintains that reputation with the specific care of someone who understands that the reputation is also a form of protection. As long as he is the kid who does not care about anything, nobody is looking closely enough to see what he actually cares about, which is the specific vulnerability that the performance is protecting. The performance is always slightly ahead of the reality. The reality is more complicated and more tender than the performance allows. The show knows this and depicts it consistently without making it the subject of the episode's comedy, which would break the protection the performance is providing. The specific humor that Bart finds funny is worth examining because it reveals something about what he actually values. He is not a fan of humor that punches down, of comedy that works by making someone smaller. His preferred humor attacks power, punctures pomposity, reveals the gap between the way things present themselves and the way things actually are. This is not the humor of someone who does not care about anything. It is the humor of someone who cares very specifically about pretension and authority and the way that institutional power maintains itself through performance. The pranks are a form of criticism. The criticism is a form of care. Care about a world that should be better than it is and that Bart does not yet have the tools to improve through any means other than the prank. Lisa's relationship with her own potential is one of the most complicated, ongoing psychological dynamics in the show. She knows she is capable of things that Springfield cannot accommodate. She knows that the life available to her within Springfield's specific constraints is substantially smaller than the life her abilities would support in a more enabling environment. She has been living with this gap since she was old enough to understand that it existed, which was very young. The question of how to live well inside a gap between what you are and what your circumstances can contain is one of the show's most serious ongoing concerns, and Lisa is the character who embodies it most fully because her gap is the largest and the most clearly visible. The saxophone as an object has a physical presence in the show that goes beyond its role as a character symbol. Lisa treats it with the care of someone who understands the relationship between the maintenance of an instrument and the quality of music it can produce. The case, always nearby. The reeds, selected with attention. The specific way she holds the instrument in playing scenes, which is accurate to how a real saxophone player holds one. The show's animators clearly studied what playing the saxophone actually looks like and rendered it with enough accuracy to be convincing to someone who knows the instrument. This accuracy is not required for the character to work. It is there because the people making the show believed that getting it right mattered. Her relationship with the adult world, the world of people who have figured out how to make their specific capabilities work in a real environment, is one of the show's most bittersweet ongoing observations. She sees adult versions of what she might become, and she evaluates them with an intelligence that is both her gift and her limitation. She can see their flaws as clearly as their achievements, which makes them simultaneously models and cautionary examples. The adults who genuinely impress her, who have managed to be both capable and good in the specific ways that she values both of those things, are rare, and she recognizes them immediately when they appear, which is why their eventual departure or disappointing revelation always lands with particular weight for her specifically. The relationship between Springfield's various authority figures, the way they interact with each other and with the broader community, is one of the show's most accurate institutional portraits. The principal and the superintendent and the school board and the mayor and the police chief and the various civic officials who appear across the series are not simply individual corrupt or incompetent people. They are participants in a system that has specific incentives and specific pressures and that produces specific behaviors in the people operating within it. The corruption and the incompetence are outputs of the system rather than simply personal failures, which is the more honest and more difficult observation, and the show makes it consistently without always foregrounding it as the episode's subject. The Springfield Church, where Reverend Lovejoy ministers to the community with the specific weariness of a man who went into the ministry believing more than he currently believes, is one of the show's most accurate depictions of American religious institutional life. The congregation attends with varying degrees of genuine conviction. The sermons address topics that are adjacent to the community's actual spiritual concerns without quite landing on them. The institutional form of religion is maintained because the institution has been there long enough to be self-sustaining, because the community needs it as a social anchor even if individual members would struggle to articulate what specifically they are getting from it. Ned is the exception who proves the rule. His genuine faith, maintained with a sincerity that the institution barely requires of him, is visible against the background of a community that relates to the church as a social obligation more than as a spiritual practice. The specific way each main character fails is as revealing as the way each main character succeeds. Homer's failures are all about attention and the specific ways his cognitive fog prevents him from being present to the things that matter most to him. Marge's failures are all about the gap between what she maintains and what she allows herself, the way she can hold everything for the family and struggle to hold anything for herself. Bart's failures are about the specific misdirection of real capability, the ways his intelligence and his creativity express themselves through channels that produce consequences, rather than through channels that would produce recognition. Lisa's failures are about the relationship between high expectation and available reality, the specific heartbreak of someone who can see clearly enough to understand exactly how much further things could go, and who keeps being stopped at the current level by forces that clear sight cannot overcome. The show's humor at its best is a form of love. The best Simpsons jokes come from a genuine affection for the characters and the world they inhabit, from the specific warmth of someone who knows these people well and finds them funny in the way you find people funny when you love them. Not mockingly, not cruelly, but with the recognition of the specific absurdity of their specific version of trying to be human in the world. The comedy is warmest when it is most specific, when the joke is about Homer in particular rather than about a man of Homer's type, when it requires knowing who he is in order to fully receive it. This specificity of affection is what the show has been building across 36 years, and it is the quality that makes the comedy feel different from comedy that simply uses character types as joke delivery mechanisms. The feeling of watching The Simpsons late at night, when the world outside is quiet and the familiar voices and the familiar colors and the familiar problems are the only thing going, is a specific feeling that many people have had and that is hard to describe accurately. It is companionship of a specific kind, the companionship of a world you know well that asks nothing of you and that continues whether or not you are paying close attention. Springfield runs. Homer falls asleep on the couch, and Marge covers him, and Bart is upstairs, and Lisa is playing, and Maggie is watching in her crib. And all the details are in the backgrounds of the frames waiting for whoever wants to find them. And the cooling towers lean in the dark outside the plant, and the sky is doing what skies do at this hour. And the show is still going. It is always still going. That is the whole of what it offers, and the whole of what is hidden inside it. The details accumulate. The show continues. The family persists. And wherever you are tonight, whatever time it is, whatever brought you here and kept you listening this long, Springfield is glad to have you. Good night. The Springfield of the early 1990s, when the show was establishing itself and finding what it was capable of, has a different quality from the Springfield of the mid-1990s peak and from the Springfield of the 2000s and beyond. These differences are not simply differences in production quality or in writing quality, though those differences exist as well. They are differences in the specific relationship between the show and the cultural moment it was produced in, differences in what questions the show was asking and what the available answers looked like from the specific vantage point of that specific year. The first season Springfield is a rougher, more uncertain place than what the show became. The character designs are not yet fully settled. The voice performances are finding their registers. The animation is cruder in ways that reflect both the production limitations of the time and the learning curve of a new show working out what it is. But the emotional core of the show is present from the earliest episodes, fully formed in ways that the visual and production elements around it took several seasons to match. The Simpson family is recognizably themselves in the very first episode, which is either a testament to how clearly Groening and the early writing staff understood who these people were, or evidence that the characters arrived more complete than the circumstances around them. The transition from the first season to the second to the third and onward follows a specific trajectory of increasing confidence in the material. Each season added something to the visual language, to the character depth, to the understanding of what Springfield could contain and what kinds of stories it could tell. By season 4, the show knew what it was capable of, which is the specific quality of creative confidence that comes from having proved the range of a form to yourself through sustained practice. Season 4 through 8 exploits that confidence in ways that the show never quite managed to replicate after the creative team of those years dispersed. The specific writers who produced the peak seasons of The Simpsons have gone on to create much of the American comedy that followed, and the influence of their Springfield work is visible throughout the comedy landscape of the past 3 decades. The specific sensibility of the peak Simpsons, the combination of genuine emotional specificity and absurdist situation and satirical precision, became a template for ambitious American comedy writing in the decades that followed. The show produced a generation of writers who understood that comedy could carry real feeling, that the laugh and the genuine emotion were not competitors. and who brought that understanding to everything they made afterward. The network context in which the show operates is one that has changed dramatically across its 36-year run. When The Simpsons debuted in 1989, it was competing for attention with a very different television landscape than the one it inhabits now. The proliferation of channels and streaming services and the collapse of the broadcast network appointment television model have changed the conditions under which the show exists and under which it is received. The Simpsons now competes for attention with everything that has ever been made, and yet it continues to attract enough viewers and enough cultural attention to justify its continued production. This persistence is not simply inertia. Though inertia plays a role, it is evidence that the thing the show offers, the specific combination of character and world and comedy and feeling that Springfield provides, is not fully replaceable by the alternatives. The specific quality of the show's influence on subsequent animation is visible everywhere in American animated comedy, but is rarely fully acknowledged, because influence becomes invisible when it has been absorbed completely. Enough. The Simpsons established that animated series for adults could carry genuine emotional complexity, that character depth was not incompatible with the cartoon form, that a fictional animated world could be developed with the same care and the same level of world-building investment that live-action drama brought to its settings. Every American adult animated comedy that has followed operates in the space that The Simpsons created, using the vocabulary it established, working within the possibilities it defined. The influence is structural. The relationship between The Simpsons and the American political landscape across its run is one of the more interesting long threads to trace through the series. The show was produced and aired through the administrations of Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, and Biden, each of which represented a different version of American political reality, and the show navigated each of these different realities with varying degrees of success. The satire was sharpest in the periods when the show's specific comic sensibility most closely aligned with the specific failures of the political moment. The satire was most strained in the periods when the political situation was too extreme or too painful for the show's particular comic register to contain it comfortably. The city of Springfield itself, as a fictional urban environment, is one of the most developed imaginings of an American city in the history of American popular culture. It has a downtown and residential neighborhoods and industrial zones and parks, and a waterfront and an airport and a highway system, and a public transit system that was famously expanded with the help of a conman. It has a history that extends back to the 18th century, and a relationship to that history that is as complicated and selective as the relationship any American city has to its founding myths. It has economic geography that reflects the specific inequalities of late 20th century American urban development. Springfield is a real American city rendered in yellow and rendered in cartoon, and the rendering does not diminish the reality of what is being depicted. The show's relationship to class is one of its most consistent threads, and one that has become more, rather than less, relevant across its run. Springfield is a working-class town with a single dominant employer and a civic culture organized around the specific vulnerabilities and the specific solidarities of working-class American life. The families who live there are not poor, and they are not comfortable in the way that requires no effort. They are the families that America has the most of and tells the most stories about, while often understanding the least, and The Simpsons has been telling one version of their story with more honesty and more affection than almost any other American cultural product across the same period. Homer's job, the job he has held through all the variations and the disasters and the hundreds of other jobs he has briefly occupied and then returned from, is a working-class job at a working-class facility. He is not management. He is not professional. He is a man who goes to work at a specific machine in a specific facility and performs a specific function that is one part of a larger operation, and this specificity of his position within the labor hierarchy of the plant is one of the show's most consistent and most accurate pieces of characterization. Homer is working class in the specific sense that his livelihood depends on showing up and performing the specific function he has been assigned, and the precariousness of that arrangement is a permanent background condition of the family's life, even in the episodes where the precariousness is not foregrounded. The specific way the show has handled the evolution of technology across its run is one of its most interesting ongoing negotiations. The Simpsons began in a world of rotary phones and broadcast television, and has navigated through the arrival of the internet, the smartphone, social media, and whatever comes next. Each technological transition required the show to update the world of Springfield without breaking the continuity of its characters or its world building. The way the show has handled this is through the same mechanism it uses to handle everything else. It absorbs the change without acknowledging that a change has occurred, which is both a production convenience and a formal statement about the relationship between Springfield and the real world it both reflects and exists outside of. The specific texture of Springfield's social life, the way its residents relate to each other in public and in private, and in the various intermediate spaces, is one of the show's most accurate and most affectionate portraits of American community life. People know each other in Springfield in the way that people know each other in towns that are small enough that the same faces appear in the same contexts over a long enough period to produce familiarity without necessarily producing intimacy. Apu knows his customers. The barber knows his clients. The people at Moe's Tavern know each other in the specific way of people who have been sharing the same small space for the same recurring reasons across many years. These are the textures of community that the show has built into the background of Springfield across its entire run, giving the town a social density that is felt rather than stated. The show's treatment of neighborhood, of what it means to live in proximity to specific other people and to be constituted in part by that proximity over time, is most fully developed in the relationship between the Simpsons and the Flanders. These two families have been neighbors for as long as the show has been running. They have watched each other's children grow without growing. They have been present for each other's crises and for each other's ordinary days. They have developed the specific familiarity of long-term neighbors, the knowledge of each other's habits and preferences and small daily patterns that accumulates without either party having decided to accumulate it. This familiarity is different from friendship. Though it contains elements of friendship, it is the specific bond of people who share geography across time, and the show has been developing it since the first episode. The Homer of the late seasons is a different Homer from the Homer of the early seasons, in ways that the show does not acknowledge but that are visible to the attentive viewer. He is slightly looser, slightly more comfortable in his own skin, as if decades of the same daily routine have produced in him a form of ease that the earlier Homer, still surprised by his own life, did not have. He is also, in ways that are harder to describe but equally real, slightly further from the version of himself that could write that letter to Lisa, slightly more thoroughly adapted to the fog. Whether this represents character development or character drift, whether it is a change the show intended or a change produced by the passage of time in the performances and the writing, is a question without a clean answer. It is probably both. The Marge of the later seasons has a different quality of weariness from the Marge of the early seasons, a weariness that is not resignation but experience, the specific, settled quality of someone who has been doing something difficult for a very long time, and who has worked out how to do it without it costing quite as much as it once did. The efficiency is real, and it is the efficiency of a person who has found the most sustainable way to be what she is. But there is something in the early Marge, the Marge who is still slightly startled by her own life, who has not yet fully accommodated herself to all of it, that the later efficiency cannot fully replace. The show is aware of this. It surfaces the early Marge in flashback episodes and in specific moments of character revelation that remind you of the full range of who she is beneath the efficiency. Bart in the later seasons is a different child from Bart in the early seasons, in ways that reflect the show's accumulated understanding of what he is. The early Bart is more raw, more genuinely angry under the performance, closer to the edge of something that the performance was not quite containing. The later Bart has a more settled relationship with his own persona, a greater ease with the version of himself he presents to the world, as if the years of maintaining the performance have made it less effortful. He is funnier in the later seasons in some ways and less alive in others, the specific trade-off of a character whose relationship to his own performance has become more sophisticated, but at the cost of some of the rawness that made the performance feel necessary. Lisa across the seasons is the most consistent of the main characters, which reflects the show's understanding that her consistency is the most essential thing about her. She is always reaching. She is always playing the saxophone. She is always lonely in the specific way of someone whose intelligence has not been met by the available circumstances. She ages less than any of the others, even in the invisible sense of the character's accumulating history in the performances, because the writers and the voice actor have always known who Lisa is with a clarity that the other characters did not always have, and clarity produces consistency. The Lisa of the latest season is recognizable as continuous, with the Lisa of the second season in a way that Homer and Marge and Bart are not quite, because Lisa's essence was understood from the beginning and has been honored consistently ever since. The show, at its core, is about the persistence of love within imperfect circumstances. The circumstances of the Simpson family have been various and difficult, and sometimes catastrophic, and always, by the end of the episode, not quite enough to break what the family is. The love does not make the circumstances better. It does not improve Homer's cognition or simplify the gap between Marge's capabilities and her opportunities, or resolve Lisa's loneliness or answer Bart's particular form of need. It just continues, imperfectly and reliably, producing the specific texture of a family that has been together for a long time and that has chosen to keep being together through all the accumulated evidence that together is difficult. This is the show's deepest and most American subject, and it has been the subject from the beginning, hidden behind the jokes and the disasters and the celebrity appearances and the couch gags, patient as all the other hidden things, waiting for the viewer who is paying attention at the right hour. Tonight you have been that viewer. The hour has been right. The details have been accumulating around you and through you, settling into whatever space you carry your relationship to this show. Springfield is quieter now. The town has been going about its particular business throughout the night, and the business is almost done. Homer will sleep until the alarm goes off, and then he will drive to the plant. Marge will be the first one up, moving through the house in the specific way she moves through it in the early morning, claiming the space and the silence before the day requires her to share it with everyone else. Bart will sleep until the last possible moment and then move very quickly. Lisa will be awake earlier than anyone expects, already reading, already thinking, the saxophone case already open because the day begins with music, if she can get to it before anyone is awake to need something from her. Maggie will be watched over, enormous-eyed and ready. The cooling towers will still be there. The sky will do what it does. The plant will run. And all the details you have found tonight will be there in the next episode you watch and in the one after that, patient and specific, and placed by people who believed that a cartoon could carry something real if you cared enough about every frame. They were right. Good night. The show's relationship to death is handled more honestly than its reputation as a comedy would suggest. Springfield residents die in non-canonical contexts with regularity. In the Treehouse of Horror episodes that happen outside the main continuity, in background gags that treat death as a passing detail rather than a narrative event. But the canonical deaths within the show's main timeline are handled with considerably more weight. When a character who matters to the main family dies within the show's actual continuity, the show stops being a comedy long enough to acknowledge what death is, which is the irreversible end of a specific relationship with a specific person, the particular form of absence that cannot be mitigated by any of the mechanisms available in the show's normal comedic toolkit. The death of Maud Flanders is the most significant canonical death in the show's history, and the one that has had the most lasting impact on the characterization of a main supporting character. Maud was killed because the voice actress who played her had a contract dispute, which means the death was a production necessity rather than a narrative choice. But the show chose to handle it with more care than the circumstances required. Ned's grief was depicted over multiple episodes. The aftermath of the death was allowed to matter. The family Ned had been raising within the dynamic of Maud, and Ned had to reconstitute itself around a new center of gravity, which it did over the course of several seasons, and the reconstitution was shown rather than simply announced. The show's handling of parental loss, specifically the loss of parents by the adult members of the Simpson family, runs through several of the series' most emotionally significant episodes. The death of Marge's mother, when it comes, is handled with a specific quality of adult grief, the grief of someone who has been anticipating a loss for long enough, that the loss itself arrives as a completion rather than a shock, and who still finds that completion is not the same thing as acceptance, that expecting something and experiencing it are different orders of knowledge. The show allows this grief to be real without resolving it into the kind of emotional clarity that real grief rarely achieves. The aging of Abe Simpson across the series is one of the show's most careful ongoing depictions of the relationship between the very old and those who care for them. Abe is more diminished in the later seasons than in the early ones, more confused, less reliably present in his own narrative. The show depicts this trajectory with an accuracy that reflects either careful research or personal experience on the part of the writers. The specific way that extended age changes the relationship between a parent and an adult child, how it shifts the terms of the emotional dynamics that have been running between them for decades. Homer's patience with his father in the later seasons has a different quality from his patience in the early seasons, the patience of someone who has accommodated himself to a situation rather than the patience of someone who has not yet fully accepted it. The specific emotional register of the episodes that center on Homer's anxiety about his own mortality, which appear at various points in the series, reflects the show's honest engagement with the fact that Homer's life does not have a warranty. He has come close to dying many times. He has confronted the possibility of his own death with varying degrees of equanimity across the series. The most interesting of these confrontations are the ones where what he fears is not the dying itself, but the incompleteness, the specific unfinishedness of a life that has not yet done what he needs to do. He is not finished being Marge's husband. He is not finished being the kind of father his children deserve. The fear is not of non-existence, but of having left things undone that mattered. The show's relationship to marriage, which it has been depicting through Homer and Marge for 36 years, is one of the most sustained fictional explorations of American marital life in the history of the medium. The marriage has been tested and strained and occasionally brought to a point of genuine threat, and each of these testings has produced a restoration that is not a simple return to the previous state, but an accommodation of what the testing revealed. The marriage of the later seasons is not the marriage of the early seasons. It is the same marriage, which means it has changed because the people in it have changed, because what they have been through together has changed what being together means. The show knows this. It is visible in the performances and in the writing, the accumulated weight of what Homer and Marge have been to each other for the entirety of the show's run. Marge's decision to stay with Homer, which she makes again in every episode implicitly and occasionally explicitly, is not a passive choice. It is a choice made with full knowledge of the alternative, which is the departure that she has considered at various points across the series, and that she has consistently not chosen. She stays not because she cannot imagine leaving, but because she has imagined it, and found, in the imagining, that what she would be leaving behind was not outweighed by what she would be moving toward. This is what commitment looks like in the show's most honest episodes, not the absence of the impulse to leave, but the choice to stay with the full awareness that leaving is possible. The specific dynamics of the Simpsons household, the relationships between each member and each other member, form a matrix of 6 bilateral relationships plus the family as a whole, and the show has explored each of these bilateral relationships across its run with varying degrees of depth and consistency. Homer and Marge, Homer and Bart, Homer and Lisa, Homer and Maggie, Marge and Bart, Marge and Lisa, Marge and Maggie, Bart and Lisa, Bart and Maggie, Lisa and Maggie, plus the family together as a unit. That is a substantial relational landscape to maintain across 36 years of episodic production, and the show's ability to keep all of these relationships active and specific and true to who the characters are is one of its most underappreciated achievements in sustained character work. The relationship between Bart and Maggie is one of the least explored of the family's bilateral relationships, and one of the most interesting, precisely because of what the show has not done with it. Bart is the sibling closest to Maggie in the household's daily routine, the one who encounters her most frequently in the house's common spaces. He treats her with a casual fondness that is different in quality from his relationship with Lisa, less fraught and less charged with the history of sibling competition. He is simply kind to Maggie in a way that the performance of not caring does not prevent, which is one of the quieter and more revealing things the show has told you about who he is. Lisa and Maggie's relationship is built in almost complete silence from Maggie's end, which gives it an unusual quality. Lisa talks to Maggie. Maggie listens with a quality of attention that Lisa, who experiences significant deficits of genuine attention in her daily life, notices and values. The exchanges between them have a tenderness that is different from Lisa's relationship with Bart or Homer or Marge, the tenderness of someone who has found a listener who cannot yet respond verbally, and who listens therefore without judgment, without the complications that verbal response introduces. Lisa can say things to Maggie that she cannot say to anyone else because Maggie will carry them without answering, which is sometimes exactly what saying something requires. The show's depiction of early childhood, of what Maggie's perspective on the world around her might be, is one of its most formally interesting recurring experiments. Maggie sees the same events as the other characters and processes them from a cognitive position that is radically different, less mediated by language and by the social conventions that language carries. Her version of Springfield is organized around physical sensation and immediate experience, and the specific emotional responses that her body registers before her developing mind can translate them. The episodes that attempt to show Springfield from her perspective, to give you access to the world as she experiences it, are some of the show's most formally adventurous, willing to depart from the show's usual visual and narrative conventions in service of something that requires a different approach. The nuclear plant's role in the daily life of Springfield extends beyond its function as an employer and a visual landmark. It provides the electricity that powers every home and business in the town, which means that every moment of domestic comfort in the Simpson household, every lamp and every refrigerator and every television set, and every alarm clock that wakes Homer in the morning, is powered by the same facility that Homer's incompetence as safety inspector has allowed to accumulate hundreds of safety violations. The comfort and the danger share the same source. The family's evening warmth and the coolant that is quietly leaking into the water table come from the same set of cracked pipes. The show has always known this and has made it visible in the background without making it the subject of any episode's explicit argument. The specific quality of Springfield's water has been referenced at various points in the series as something that is probably not right in ways that no one has officially investigated. The fish in the river have 3 eyes. The tap water has a history of producing unexpected results in specific episodes where it has been tested or treated as a plot element. The municipal water supply runs through infrastructure that has been in place since before the current safety standards existed, and that has never been comprehensively inspected during the years of the plant's operation. Everyone drinks the water. Nobody thinks much about it. This is depicted consistently enough to constitute a running background fact about Springfield, a piece of information that is present in the show's world without being the subject of the show's attention. The specific quality of the air in Springfield, in the neighborhoods immediately downwind of the nuclear plant, is another background environmental fact that the show has alluded to without making explicit. The occasional visible emissions from the cooling towers appear in establishing shots without being characterized as dangerous. The luminescence visible in specific weather conditions, particularly in the episodes where the plant's runoff has been more directly referenced, suggests a quality of outdoor air that is slightly different from the ambient atmosphere of a town without a nuclear facility in its immediate vicinity. These are background details rather than narrative subjects, but their consistency across many episodes makes them part of the texture of the world. The relationship between Springfield's physical environment and the specific physical characteristics of its residents is one of those threads the show introduced in its early seasons and has maintained without ever turning into an explicit storyline. The yellow skin that all Springfield residents share, the specific physical capabilities that Homer demonstrates, the ability to absorb damage that should be fatal and to recover from it with a speed that has no biological explanation. The particular quality of the residents' memory and their ability to forget significant events. These characteristics are present throughout the series, consistent enough to be a fact about the world, rather than a joke about a specific episode, and their consistency is itself a form of information. Bart's skateboard has been with him since the beginning, and has survived everything that Springfield has thrown at it, which makes it possibly the most indestructible object in the show's universe apart from Homer himself. The board is always where it needs to be when Bart needs it. It is always in working order. It has absorbed impacts and falls and the general physical treatment of a child who uses it with the complete commitment of someone who has integrated it into his body's understanding of how movement works. The board is not simply transportation, it is the physical extension of Bart's relationship with the world, the interface through which he negotiates the gap between where he is and where he wants to be. The specific sound design of Springfield is something that rewards attention through a headset or a good sound system rather than through a television speaker. The ambient sounds of the different locations in the show, the specific acoustic signatures of the school and the plant, and Moe's Tavern and the Simpson house at different times of day, have been built with a care that most viewers register only as the general feeling that the show sounds like itself. The school has the ambient noise of an institution, the low hum of many people in a shared space managed by institutional authority. The plant has the mechanical undertone of heavy industrial equipment, the sounds of processes running that the people inside them have learned not to consciously register. The Simpson house at night has a specific quiet that is different from its daytime sound, the quiet of a space in which the day's activity has recently ended and has not yet been replaced by anything. The show's music in its quietest moments, the cues that play under scenes of genuine emotional weight, is where the series' musical ambition is most clearly revealed. The comedy cues are broad and readable, designed to confirm the joke and to prepare for the next one. But the emotional underscoring that plays under the scenes the show is most serious about is more complex, more carefully calibrated to the specific emotional temperature of what is happening on screen, more willing to allow silence when silence is what the scene requires. The best Simpsons emotional scenes have music that you would not notice unless you were listening for it specifically, music that is doing its work in the background of your attention while your foreground attention is on the characters. The sound of Homer's contented sigh, the specific exhalation that he produces when something has gone exactly as well as he hoped, is one of the show's most instantly recognizable pieces of audio shorthand. It communicates more character information in 2 seconds than most television can communicate in a full scene. The specific quality of Homer's relationship to pleasure, the way he receives good things with his whole body rather than just with his cognitive response to them. This sound is not written in the script. It is in the performance, produced by Dan Castellaneta's decades of inhabiting the character, the natural vocalization of a very specific personality encountering something it recognizes as good. The chalkboard at Springfield Elementary that Bart writes on in the opening sequence has been used more creatively and more specifically than most people give it credit for. The sentences he writes are chosen with the same care that is brought to everything else in the show's visual language. They are not random. They reflect specific aspects of the episode that follows, or of the production moment in which the episode was made, or of the show's ongoing relationship to the cultural context it was produced in. The chalkboard is a joke that happens before the episode begins, a piece of commentary delivered in the specific grammar of a school punishment, and it has been maintained across the entire run with a specificity of attention that it does not always receive. The classroom where Bart sits in the episodes that take place at school has a blackboard that sometimes contains legible educational content in the background, content that was written specifically for the frame, and that will appear on screen for 2 or 3 seconds at most before the scene moves on. The content is sometimes placeholder text, and sometimes actually relevant to the episode's subject matter, sometimes an assignment that has been written on the board by someone who thought about what Mrs. Krabappel might have assigned on this particular day. The care that goes into something that will be visible for less than 3 seconds and that most viewers will never be able to read is the specific form of professional investment that makes The Simpsons at every scale of its production. The library at Springfield Elementary, visible in background shots of the school's interior, has books on its shelves. The books have spines with visible titles in specific frames. The titles are chosen. Some of them are genuine books that could plausibly be in a school library. Others are titles that comment on the episode or on the school or on something else the production team found worth noting. The library is a complete library in the background of a cartoon, stocked by people who thought about what this specific institution would have on its shelves, and who committed to that thinking at a level of specificity that no viewer was ever going to be able to fully inventory. The hidden details of Springfield are not limited to what can be seen. They extend into what is heard, what is implied, what is present in the background of the production's decision-making in ways that are visible only if you are looking at the right level of resolution. The show has been made at every level of resolution simultaneously, with the same investment in the things that would be immediately visible and the things that would be found only by the most attentive viewer who ever paused the right frame at the right moment. Springfield is a world built with the understanding that the world would be watched many times, that the same images would be returned to across years and decades by viewers who were looking for different things at different stages of their relationship with the show. The details are there for all of those viewers, at every stage of their looking, patient as good things are patient, available when you are ready for them. Good night, Springfield. Good good night from wherever you are. The seasons of Springfield are depicted with a care and specificity that rewards attention at the level of the establishing shot. The summer episodes have a quality of heat visible in the air above hot pavement, the specific shimmer that hot asphalt produces on a clear afternoon. The autumn episodes have the palette shift toward orange and brown that American landscapes undergo in the weeks before the cold arrives, visible in the trees that line the residential streets of the town. The winter episodes have a specific quality of compressed light, the flat, even brightness of snow cover that eliminates the usual play of shadow across the visual environment. These seasonal qualities are not always perfectly consistent across the show's production history, but they are present with enough regularity to give Springfield a temporal dimension, a life in real meteorological time that most animated settings do not possess. The specific quality of a Springfield Christmas episode is worth dwelling on, because the show has been producing them since its first season, and they have accumulated their own aesthetic and emotional vocabulary across decades. The Christmas palette has a specific warmth, the warmth of interior light against exterior cold, the warmth of a season whose commercial apparatus has been designed to produce specific feelings, and that The Simpsons depicts with a characteristic mixture of affection for those feelings and skepticism about the apparatus producing them. The Homer of a Christmas episode is a slightly different Homer from the Homer of other episodes, more earnest in his desire for the holiday to go well, more vulnerable to its specific forms of disappointment when it does not. The Halloween episodes, The Treehouse of Horror, occupy a completely different position in the show's production than the Christmas episodes because they exist outside the main continuity. They are the show's laboratory, the place where the formal conventions that govern the regular episodes can be suspended, and the show can do things that its normal format does not allow. The Treehouse of Horror episodes have produced some of the show's most formally adventurous and most genuinely frightening pieces of television, works that function as genuine horror or genuine science fiction, rather than simply as horror or science fiction parody. They are also the place where the consequences that the regular show cannot sustain can be briefly experienced. Characters can die, the world can end, the family can fail in ways that the reset of the main timeline will not carry. The freedom of the non-canonical is used with the specific ambition of a production team that knows what it can do when the usual rules do not apply. The specific relationship between Springfield and the federal government is one of the show's most consistent sources of institutional satire. The FBI, the EPA, the Department of Health and Human Services, various unnamed regulatory agencies. They appear periodically in Springfield, investigate something, reach conclusions, and then depart with those conclusions, having produced approximately zero lasting change in the conditions that prompted the investigation. This is an accurate portrait of the relationship between federal regulatory power and entrenched local interests in a country where regulatory capture and political influence and the simple inertia of institutional life conspire to ensure that investigations rarely produce the consequences that their mandate specifies. The federal government in Springfield is perpetually arriving and perpetually insufficient, which is the show's honest assessment of what the federal government can and cannot do in real communities with real power structures. The Springfield Post, the local newspaper, exists as a background institution in the show and has been used across various episodes to comment on local events in ways that reflect the show's understanding of how local journalism works in American communities. The paper covers the stories that local newspapers cover: municipal elections and local business news, and school board meetings and crime reports, and the various civic events that give a community's public life its texture. It covers these things with the specific quality of local journalism, the close familiarity with the community, and the specific form of capture by local interests that comes from being financially dependent on the same power structures you are supposed to be covering. The Springfield Post is a real newspaper in a fictional town, complete with the specific limitations and the specific possibilities that newspapers of its type actually have. The show's depiction of television within the show, the specific content of the programs that the Simpsons family watches, is one of its most consistent forms of media commentary. Krusty the Clown's show is a children's entertainment product organized entirely around commercial interests, a vehicle for selling things to children while providing the minimum amount of actual entertainment required to keep them watching. The local news is organized around sensationalism and ratings rather than around the informational needs of the community. The soap operas and the action shows and the variety programs that appear in background shots of The Simpsons television are all recognizable as specific types of American television content, rendered in a way that makes visible the commercial and ideological assumptions that most viewers have learned not to see. The food at The Simpsons table across the show's many dinner scenes is one of those background details that has accumulated its own kind of richness across decades of the same setting. The family eats together at the kitchen table in many episodes, and the food on the table varies in ways that reflect the episode's circumstances. When Marge has had time and resources, the food has the quality of genuine home cooking. When the episode's situation has compromised the usual domestic routine, the food reflects that compromise. These variations are not dramatically significant. They are the texture of a household that is working with what it has and producing dinner regardless of the conditions available, which is what households do. The specific quality of the Simpsons house at different times of day is something the show returns to with enough consistency to constitute a portrait of the building as a character. The house in the morning has an urgency and a slight disorder as the family assembles itself for the day. The house in the afternoon, when Marge is often the only one in it, has a different quality of settled purposefulness. The house in the early evening, when the family is reassembling, has the specific quality of a space being reactivated after a period of quiet. And the house late at night, when everyone else is sleeping and the house makes the small sounds that houses make when the people in them are not moving around, has a quality of privacy and peace that belongs to no one in particular and to the building itself. The specific way the show handles the transition between a comedic scene and a genuine emotional moment is one of its most refined technical achievements. The transition is not abrupt. It is not a gear shift that announces itself. It is a gradual change in register that the audience follows without necessarily being aware that they are being led from one emotional territory to another. The comedy never fully disappears in the emotional moments, because the show understands that genuine emotion in the context of a comedy is not the comedy momentarily set aside. It is the comedy refined to a different purpose, the same sensibility operating in a different mode. The laugh and the feel are not competitors. They are the same impulse directed at different objects. The show's ability to sustain this dual register, to be genuinely funny and genuinely moving in close proximity without one undermining the other, is the achievement that most distinguishes it from other American animated comedies. The reason it has been so difficult to replicate this achievement is that it requires the full investment of the production at every level. The writing, the voice performances, the music, the visual choices. Any one of these elements pulling toward pure comedy or pure sentiment at the wrong moment breaks the balance. The balance requires everything to be calibrated to the same understanding of what the scene is doing and what the audience needs it to do. The legacy of The Simpsons in American culture extends far beyond the show itself into the vocabulary and the sensibility of American comedy and American cultural commentary more broadly. The specific mode of satire that the show practiced at its peak, the combination of genuine character investment and satirical awareness and emotional honesty, has been the template for the most ambitious American comedy produced in the decades since. The shows that followed it, the animated and the live-action comedies that cited it as an influence, were all reaching for some version of what it had achieved. The comedy that carries real feeling, the world that is built for comedy but that is also genuinely inhabited, the characters who are funny because they are specific and real, rather than because they are designed to deliver jokes. The specific thing that makes Springfield, Springfield, the thing that distinguishes it from every other fictional American town, is not any single element of its design or its characters or its comedy. It is the accumulated quality of all of those things together, maintained across time and across the variations of creative teams and production circumstances, sustained by a commitment to the world that has persisted longer than almost anything else in the history of American television. Springfield is the product of sustained collective attention paid to a single fictional place for 36 years, and that sustained attention has produced something that individual episodes, however good, cannot fully account for. It has produced a world. The world is available to you tonight. It has all its details still in it, all the things that the people who made it put there for the viewer who is paying attention, all the things they put there for themselves, all the things that accumulated without anyone deciding that they would accumulate. The details are patient. The world is patient. It has been here for 36 years and it will be here tomorrow. Sleep well. All of Springfield is quiet now. The cooling towers lean into the dark. The plant runs. The house on Evergreen Terrace has its lights out. The family sleeps, imperfectly and reliably, in the specific configurations that years of living together have produced. The night is deep and wide and the details are everywhere in it. You have been here for a long time tonight. The show has kept you company, which is what it has always been for, and you have found some of what was hidden in it, which is what the hidden things have always been waiting for. That is the whole of it. Everything else is in the episodes themselves, waiting for the next time you watch. Good night from Springfield. Good night. The show's treatment of male friendship, specifically the friendship between Homer and Lenny and Carl and Barney, is one of its most consistent and most accurate depictions of a specific American social pattern. These men have been friends for a long time without the friendship having developed in the directions that the cultural narrative around male friendship usually traces. They do not talk about their feelings in the explicit way that the therapeutic model of friendship would recommend. They do not provide each other with the kind of articulated emotional support that contemporary discourse around friendship often emphasizes. What they do is show up. They are at the bar when Homer needs them to be at the bar. They are in the seats next to him at whatever event the episode has gathered them for. The friendship consists primarily of presence, of the reliable fact of each other in familiar shared spaces across long periods of time, and this mode of friendship is depicted as genuinely valuable rather than as an inferior substitute for more expressive forms of connection. Barney Gumble is one of the show's most poignant supporting characters and one of the least fully realized, which may be related. His backstory, which includes a period of early promise followed by the specific collapse that alcoholism produces, is one of the show's most honest depictions of how a life can arrive at a destination very different from the one that seemed to be available at its beginning. The Barney of the flashback episodes, the Barney who had a clear trajectory towards something, is genuinely heartbreaking, in contrast to the Barney of the present-day episodes, not because the present-day Barney is a lesser person, but because the gap between what he was moving toward and where he ended up is so large and so clearly attributable to a single factor. The show has explored Barney's potential for sobriety and its costs and its benefits across various episodes, and the conclusion it seems to reach is that sobriety is possible for him, but that the town of Springfield is not particularly structured to support it. The specific way the show has developed Springfield's physical geography across its episodes has created a map of the town that is internally inconsistent but emotionally coherent. The individual locations are specific and recurring and have accumulated the kind of familiarity that comes from having been visited many times across many years. The path from the Simpson house to the school is a specific path that the family travels in specific ways across many episodes. The path from the house to the nuclear plant is another. The town square, where public events take place, has a specific relationship to the other major institutions of the town that the show has established through visual repetition. The geography is felt rather than mapped, present in the emotional texture of familiarity rather than in any literal spatial consistency. The specific quality of the light in Moe's Tavern across different times of day is one of those ambient details that the show maintains with more care than the location's functional role as a setting would require. In the afternoon, before the evening regulars arrive, the bar has the specific quality of an establishment caught between services, the bottles behind the bar lit by the daylight coming through the frosted windows, the bar stools empty, the floor sticky from the previous evening but not yet attended to. In the evening, when Homer and the others are there, the light is warmer and more concentrated, organized around the bar itself and the specific pool of illumination that serves the people standing or sitting at it. Late at night, when the bar is closing, the light changes again, harsher and more administrative, the light of a space being cleaned and secured rather than the light of a space being inhabited. The ceiling of the Springfield Elementary cafeteria, visible in overhead shots of the lunch scenes, has a specific quality of institutional fluorescence that the show has rendered accurately across many appearances in many episodes. This is not a ceiling that anyone chose or designed for beauty. It is the ceiling of a space designed to process large numbers of children through lunch in as efficient and as inexpensive a manner as possible, and its visual qualities reflect these priorities with the specific accuracy of something that has been observed rather than invented. The cafeteria food exists under this light. The social dynamics of the lunch table play out under this light. The particular cruelties and connections of childhood social life happen under the flat, indifferent fluorescence of a school cafeteria ceiling, which is one of the show's most accurate environmental observations. The school bus that takes Bart and Lisa to Springfield Elementary has been visible in establishing shots and transit sequences across many seasons of the show, and it has the specific character of a school bus that has been in service for a long time in an underfunded district. It is yellow in the specific way of school buses that have not been recently repainted. It makes sounds consistent with mechanical systems that are maintained at the minimum required for continued operation rather than at any higher standard. It is driven by Otto, who is, in his own way, the show's most accurate portrait of the working relationship between a minimum wage institutional employee and a job that requires a specific license but offers very little else. The show's depiction of the Springfield police station is consistent across many episodes and is an accurate portrait of the physical environment of a small city police department that has been operating under budgetary pressure for a long time. The furniture is old. The equipment is old. The specific configuration of the space reflects decisions made at a much earlier period in the department's history that have never been revisited because revisiting them would cost money, and because the current configuration functions adequately in the sense that the department continues to exist and to process whatever comes through its doors. Chief Wiggum inhabits this space with the specific ease of someone who has been here long enough that the inadequacy of it has become invisible to him. The Springfield Town Hall, where public meetings are held and where Springfield's civic life occasionally organizes itself around specific issues, has a specific visual personality that reflects the history of a building that has been the site of municipal democracy for a long time and that has been neither renovated nor particularly maintained. The portraits of past mayors on the walls are a running visual joke about the specific quality of Springfield's political history. The podium at the front is the podium of a space that has seen arguments about issues of varying significance and that has absorbed the accumulated weight of all those arguments without being transformed by any of them. Public meetings in this space tend to begin with specific civic intent and to end with the specific form of mob energy that Springfield public meetings characteristically generate. The Springfield Harbor, which appears in various episodes and which exists in some tension with the geographic impossibility of a landlocked town having oceanfront property, has a specific visual quality that the show has maintained across its many appearances. It is a working harbor, rather than a recreational one, with the infrastructure of commercial fishing and small-scale maritime trade visible in the piers, and the equipment, and the specific look of the water in a harbor that is primarily functional. The harbor gives Springfield access to a specific kind of America, the maritime working-class America of fishing communities and waterfront industry that complements the industrial working-class America of the nuclear plant without duplicating it. The Springfield nuclear plant's cafeteria, where Homer eats lunch in the episodes that take place during the workday, is one of the show's most specifically rendered institutional spaces. It has the specific quality of a corporate cafeteria that has been designed to feed a large number of people quickly and inexpensively, rather than to provide a pleasant dining environment. The food served there exists in the register of institutional nutrition, the food of a place that needs to provide calories and protein within a budget, and that achieves this goal at the cost of everything that would make the meal something a person might look forward to. Homer eats there without apparent dissatisfaction, which is either a testimony to his uncomplicated relationship with food or a statement about what institutional food can do to your expectations when you eat it regularly enough. The specific visual treatment of the Duff Brewery, which appears in the episode that takes place at the amusement park built around the Duff brand, is one of the show's most extended satires of American corporate beer culture. The brewery tour and the Duff Gardens amusement park that surrounds it are rendered in the specific visual language of American corporate entertainment, the bright colors and the mascot characters and the specific type of family-friendly chaos that corporate amusement culture produces. The revelation that all varieties of Duff beer come from the same pipe is the episode's central joke, But the visual world built around the joke is detailed and specific enough to function as a complete portrait of a phenomenon rather than simply as the setup for a punchline. The Springfield Elementary School play, which appears in various episodes and which is always a production that exceeds the school's resources while falling short of any theatrical standard, is another of the show's consistent institutional portraits. The plays are written by the children or assigned to specific grade levels or organized around whatever civic or educational theme the episode requires. The production values reflect the specific quality of a school with limited budget and parental involvement, the specific form of theatrical ambition that a dedicated teacher and some cardboard can produce when the administration is not providing resources. The parents in the audience watch these productions with the specific mixture of pride and amusement that school plays reliably generate, and their watching is one of the show's most affectionate depictions of the specific form of love that parents bring to the public failures and successes of their children's early creative attempts. The specific quality of Homer's driving is one of those ongoing background character details that the show has maintained with remarkable consistency. He drives with the specific confidence of someone who does not think about what he is doing while he is doing it, which produces a driving style that is simultaneously more aggressive than his cognitive resources would seem to support and less responsive to changing road conditions than the situation usually requires. He has hit most of the stationary objects in Springfield at various points across the series and has driven through several structures that he was not supposed to drive through. He continues to hold a valid driver's license, which is either a failure of the system or evidence that Springfield's traffic enforcement operates on the same principles as its nuclear safety inspection, present in form and absent in effect. The show's relationship to Springfield's natural environment, the trees and the river and the gorge and the hills and the sky, has been one of its most consistent sources of genuine visual beauty across its entire run. There are episodes where the natural environment of Springfield is depicted with a care and a warmth that goes well beyond functional establishing shot, where the show pauses on a piece of landscape and allows it to be beautiful in the specific way that American landscapes can be beautiful when the light is right and the season is appropriate. These moments of natural beauty exist in tension with the contaminated water table and the leaning cooling towers and the general environmental history of the town, which is perhaps the most honest thing about them. Beauty and damage can inhabit the same landscape simultaneously, which is true everywhere, and especially true in places where industry and nature have been in proximity for a long time. The specific quality of autumn in Springfield, the specific orange and gold and brown that the trees along Evergreen Terrace turn in the fall episodes, has been rendered with enough care across enough episodes to constitute a recognizable seasonal signature for the town. This is the Springfield of October, the Springfield of cooling weather and changing leaves, and the specific quality of light that the angle of the late-year sun produces over a residential American neighborhood. It is a beautiful town in October. The cooling towers are still there at the edge of the view. The fish in the river still have three eyes. The water table is still what it is. But the leaves are turning and the light is doing its late-year thing, and the neighborhood is briefly the version of itself that it is most beautiful to inhabit, and the show knows this and has been depicting it with the appropriate care across 36 years of production. The specific quality of spring in Springfield, the return of green to the landscape after the winter episodes, and the specific quality of light that the longer days of late winter and early spring produce, is another seasonal signature the show has maintained. The spring episodes have a quality of potential, of things beginning again, that the autumn episodes with their beautiful endings do not have. The family is doing things outside again after the compressed indoor quality of winter. The yard between the Simpsons and the Flanders is occupied again in the casual, ongoing way of neighbors who find reasons to be outdoors once the season permits. The town is reawakening in the specific way of American towns in the late winter, tentatively and then with gathering confidence as the light holds longer each evening. These details, the seasonal light and the changing leaves and the specific acoustic quality of a school cafeteria and the frosted windows of Moe's Tavern and the leaning of the cooling towers and the color of Homer's specific variety of duff, beer and all the books on all the shelves and all the titles, on all the spines and all the handwriting, in all the backgrounds of all the frames of all 700 and more episodes across all 36 years, constitute the hidden world of Springfield. The world is still there. Every frame of it is still there. in the archives and in the streaming services, and in whatever medium brings it to wherever you are watching from. It will be there when you come back to it, which you will, because Springfield is the kind of place people come back to. It has something that other fictional places do not quite have, something that has been built up over so long and with such consistent care that it now exists in a different category from most fictional worlds. It is not simply a setting, it is a place, and places persist. Good night. Thank you for spending this time here. The details will be there for you next time, all of them. Springfield will keep its lights on until you need them again. The relationships between Springfield's children and the physical spaces of the town are one of the show's most quietly consistent ongoing observations. Children inhabit space differently from adults. They know the routes between places that adults do not use, the shortcuts through yards and the paths along the edges of properties, and the specific gaps in fences that open onto the wider world. Bart knows Springfield in this way, through the routes available to a child on a skateboard, through the specific geography of a kid who moves through the town at the speed of a skateboard rather than a car. The town he knows is different from the town Homer knows, which is different from the town Marge knows, which is different from the town Lisa knows, which is different from the town Maggie observes from wherever she is being carried or placed. The show has occasionally depicted these different versions of the same town. The way the same streets look different to different family members depending on where they are in their own lives and what they are able to perceive from that position. Homer's Springfield is organized around the route to work and the route to the bar and the route between disasters. Marge's Springfield is organized around the school and the grocery store and the houses of the neighbors she maintains relationships with, and the church and the route between them. Lisa's Springfield is organized around the school and the library, and the specific outdoor spaces where she can be by herself with her saxophone when the house is too loud. These are not the same town. They are different neighborhoods of the same town, different versions of the same geography inhabited at different frequencies. The specific way memory functions in Springfield across the show's many flashback episodes reveals something about how the show understands the relationship between the past and the present. The flashbacks are not reliable records. They are emotional reconstructions, memories of how things felt rather than accurate documentations of how things were. The specific details of the past change, depending on what the current emotional context of the memory requires. This is accurate to how human memory actually works. The way recollection is always partly construction, always shaped by the emotional state of the person doing the recollecting, and the purposes that the recollection serves in the present moment. Springfield's past is as alive and as variable as its present, and the relationship between them is the same ongoing negotiation that characterizes the relationship between any community and its own history. The show's most honest episodes about Springfield as a community are the ones that acknowledge what it means to choose to live in a specific place with specific limitations, rather than to inhabit a theoretical somewhere else that offers more. Springfield has limitations. Every character in it knows what those limitations are. Every character has, at some point in the show's history, encountered the possibility of leaving and chosen not to, or has left briefly and returned, or has stayed without leaving and lived with the knowledge of what the staying has cost and what it has provided. The choice to stay in Springfield is not an absent-minded default. It is a repeated decision made by specific people with specific reasons, and the show's respect for those reasons is one of the things that keeps Springfield from becoming simply a symbol of limitation rather than a portrait of how actual people actually live. Homer has left Springfield. He has had opportunities and adventures and experiences outside the town and outside the life that the town contains, and he has returned from all of them. The returns are not failures. They are choices, made again and again with the full awareness of what the town is and what the town is not, in favor of what the town provides that the alternatives cannot. The house on Evergreen Terrace. The family assembled imperfectly in the rooms of that house. The specific quality of a life that he did not entirely choose but that chose him, that has shaped itself around him across decades until it fits him in the specific way that things fit when they have been in contact long enough to accommodate each other. He returns because this is where he belongs, which is the deepest and most ordinary reason anyone has for being anywhere. The show will keep going. It has been saying for years that it might end, and it has not ended, which is either a failure of resolution or evidence of the specific vitality of something that has found a way to continue being itself across longer than anyone initially imagined possible. The Simpsons, in its 37th and 38th seasons, will be recognizable as the same show that debuted in 1989, not because nothing has changed, because everything has changed, but because the thing at the center has remained coherent across all the change: the family on the couch, the house on Evergreen Terrace, the cooling towers in the background of the establishing shot, the sky doing what the sky does. The details in the frames, waiting. You know Springfield now in a way you did not when this began. The knowing is real and it is yours, built from the hours you have spent in it, and from the attention you have brought to its details. The hidden things have been revealed, and the revealing changes how you will watch the show the next time you watch it, which is the promise that attention to this kind of world always delivers. You will see more. You will hear more. The details will come to you before you look for them, because the looking has already happened, and the pattern recognition that the looking established will do the work going forward. Springfield keeps its secrets slowly. It releases them to the viewer who is willing to sit with it at this hour, in this quality of quiet, with this quality of attention. Tonight you have been that viewer. The season will turn. The sky will do its various things over the cooling towers. Homer will sleep and wake and drive to the plant and come home to the house where the family is waiting. Marge will maintain what needs to be maintained. Bart will skate and prank and briefly reveal the person under the performance and then close back around it. Lisa will play the saxophone in the evenings when the words have failed, which is often, which is why the saxophone gets as much use as it does. Maggie will watch and wait and assemble her understanding of the world with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who has all the time she needs and who is making every moment of it count. The details will be there in the background of every frame. All of them. In all the episodes, across all the seasons, in the yellow world of Springfield, patient and specific, and placed by people who believed that every frame of a cartoon that someone might someday watch deserved as much care as the frames that everyone would see. They were right about that. And you, watching, finding the details, or letting them wash over you in the late hours of wherever you are tonight, are the reason they were right. Good night. Sleep well. The show continues. The relationship that viewers develop with long-running shows is one of the more unusual forms of human attachment, and The Simpsons has produced some of the longest and deepest versions of it in the history of the medium. People who watched the show when it debuted in 1989 have now spent a significant fraction of their entire lives with it. Returning to it across childhood and adolescence and early adulthood and middle age, watching it change and watching themselves change and finding in the specific consistency of the show's core something that anchors the experience of their own passage through time. This is what long-running art can do that new art cannot. It provides a fixed point in a moving landscape. Springfield stays the same while everything else moves. And the staying is not stagnation. It is the specific form of loyalty that a place demonstrates to the people who have invested in it. The show's guest stars across its history, who number in the hundreds and who represent a significant fraction of the most famous and most culturally significant people of the past 36 years, have been absorbed into Springfield's world with varying degrees of success and integration. The best guest appearances are the ones where the famous person brings something specific to the show rather than simply lending their celebrity to it, where the show finds a way to use the particular qualities of the person rather than simply their name recognition. These appearances tend to be the ones from the peak years, when the writing staff was most skilled at writing for a specific celebrity's specific qualities rather than for the abstract fact of their fame. The later guest appearances tend toward the decorative end of the spectrum, which reflects both a change in the show's relationship to celebrity and a change in how celebrity itself functions in American culture. The specific relationship between Springfield's geography and the emotional geography of the episode set there is one of the show's most consistent and least discussed formal achievements. When an episode needs the family to be isolated and vulnerable, it tends to place them in locations that Springfield's visual language codes as exposed and uncertain. The gorge, the wilderness beyond the town's edge, the places where the familiar resources of the town's social infrastructure are not available. When an episode needs the family to be embedded in community, to feel the specific warmth of belonging to a place rather than simply inhabiting it, it tends to place them in Springfield's social spaces. The town square, the church, the school gymnasium during some civic event. The geography is expressive. The show knows where to put the family depending on what they need to feel. The specific way that Homer's intelligence expresses itself when he is not aware of using it is one of the show's most affectionate and most accurate observations about the relationship between intelligence and self-consciousness. When Homer is thinking deliberately, consciously trying to apply himself to a problem, he fails consistently and often spectacularly. When Homer stops trying to be smart and simply responds to a situation with the immediacy that his constitution allows, he sometimes produces results that are, from a certain angle, exactly right. The humor of this, the humor of the right answer arriving through the wrong process, is one of the show's most consistent sources of genuine comedy. But the observation underneath the humor is serious. Intelligence that is self-aware often functions less effectively than intelligence that operates before self-awareness has a chance to complicate it. The show's treatment of ambition, of the relationship between what people want their lives to be and what their lives actually are, is one of its most American and most honest ongoing concerns. Springfield is full of people who wanted something other than what they got and who have made various accommodations to the gap. Moe wanted to be a comedian and runs a bar. Barney wanted a career and lost it to alcoholism. Skinner, or whoever Skinner actually is, wanted to be something and ended up as the principal of a school that makes him miserable in specific ways he cannot fully escape. The accommodations to the gap between ambition and outcome constitute the specific texture of most adult lives, and the show has been depicting this texture with more accuracy than most American cultural products across the same period. The specific quality of hope in Springfield is one of the show's most sustaining qualities, and one of the things that most clearly distinguishes it from the pure cynicism that its satirical observations could easily have produced. Springfield has been subjected to everything the show could throw at it across 36 years, and it continues to hope in the specific way of people who have had enough experience with disappointment to have recalibrated their hope to something sustainable. It is not naive hope. It is the hope of people who know that the cooling towers are leaking, and that the fish have 3 eyes, and that the government will not fix it, and that Burns will continue to profit from it, and who have decided, in the face of all of this, that Tuesday night at the Simpson house will still be good enough to be worth having. This is the hope of people living actual lives, and the show has been honoring it since the beginning. The family at the end of every episode is still the family. Still imperfect, still together, still in the house on Evergreen Terrace with the television on and the cooling towers visible at the edge of the establishing shot. The resolution is never a triumph. It is a restoration, a return to the specific configuration that the episode temporarily disrupted and that the episode ends by restoring. The family is still intact. The town is still running. The details are still in the backgrounds. And the next episode will begin with the family in the same house, facing the next thing that Springfield's impossible world has prepared for them, with the same combination of inadequacy and persistence that has always been both their limitation and their defining quality. This is the whole of Springfield. This is every hidden detail in it. This is the world that has been running for 36 years in the background of American culture, patient and specific and full of things placed there by people who believed that the details mattered, that the background was as important as the foreground, that the frame at the edge of the screen was as worthy of care as the frame at the center. They were right. You know that now. Good night from Springfield. The lights are going out one by one across Evergreen Terrace. Homer is asleep. Marge has finally sat down in the quiet of the house after everyone else has gone to bed. Bart is somewhere between waking and sleeping, in that specific threshold state where the day's resistance has finally started to release. Lisa played the saxophone until the music resolved and then let the silence take over. Maggie is watching the dark. The cooling towers lean. The sky is doing what it does. Everything is still there. It always will be. Good night. The town breathes. The night holds it. The details wait in every frame for whoever comes looking. The show is still going. The family is still there. The hidden world of Springfield is still full of everything that patient attention has always been able to find in it. That is what has always been here, and that is what will always be here, and that is why you will come back. Good night. Sleep deeply. Springfield will be exactly where you left it when you return.